Nick, I just sent a text message to Ken. He said he's tuning the areas.
He should be with us shortly. He knows.
Yeah, can you hear me, Ken?
There he is. He's muted.
You're muted.
Unmute. Now I should be unmuted.
You're unmuted.
You are.
And I see you got
Fantastic.
those great books behind you.
What a library.
Yeah, it's actually a plastic, you know, like a $9 backdrop for photography use that I use for this.
It works. It works.
Yeah, my books are all downstairs, and this one's just great because if you look really closely, they don't have any titles on them. They just have like scribble where the title of the book should be.
Okay, that's to make sure it's neutral as we.
Yeah, well, you know, it's for pseudo intellectuals.
Okay, I like that too. So, okay, we got Alan Agostine in there, and of course, Gary Ackermeyer.
Hello.
We got a few more minutes to go.
So, yeah, I don't really have a planned presentation. So how do you want to kick it off? I mean, what I did was I kind of broke my life down into my career down into a couple of phases. And I thought I'd go through the different phases and what I was thinking about in each of those times, you know, the kind of stuff that was on my mind. And then get to more recent stuff where I'll probably be saying more controversial things. And that would probably launch into more interactive conversation.
Sure.
Sounds good to me. I'm hoping your first phase includes AR.
Oh, definitely.
Okay.
No, that's my second phase, I warn you.
Okay.
No, definitely, you know, there are actually 2 times I've been through AR. So I don't know, you know, it's so hard to talk about your whole life this way. You know, when I used to do presentations for a company, it's like, well, here's the new product, or here's the new technology, whatever it is. But, you know, it's hard for me to balance the arc of my life through different, you know, different interests and make it coherent. So definitely steer and prompt me.
You're playing yourself too cheap. What happened to Tim Hall? I haven't heard much about him. Did you work? You worked with him, right?
Oh yeah, I worked with him very, very closely. In fact, we shared an office, the two of us, for several years.
Where is he?
Well, I mean, I'm not in touch with that world anymore, you know, and haven't been for decades. But I know he went over to Bose.
Oh, he went over to Bose?
Yeah, definitely, and did good work there. And they gave him the very appropriate title, Manager of Acoustic Research. Because I think he was a little bitter about his departure, so that was a good title for him.
Bitter about his departure from AR?
Yeah, I mean, it was a tough time. A lot of longtime people were being let go in that era.
Who had purchased them at that time then?
Teledyne?
Well, it was long after the Teledyne purchase. I think Teledyne was in the process of putting them up for sale, and they were cutting costs. And I know that, what is it, Burke Mathis from Curtis Mathis purchased them originally. And then International Jensen bought them. And I was working for International Jensen, and so I was reconnected. And that was when I did the second wave of AR products, like the 303, that were kind of revisitations of the old products. And then after Rekaton, I guess, who did Rekaton sell them to? I mean, they wound up in a lot of places, but Darrell Ice's company, Directed Electronics, wound up owning them. So I think they're part of Directed now. But, you know, they just became a football
Yeah,
after,
right, as a
you
consumer.
know, after Teledyne
Did Tim Hall,
let them go.
was he primarily responsible for the AR9?
There were two people who were responsible for the 9. The 9 was designed, you know, there was two, there were two groups within AR doing engineering. And one was the so-called research group, and one was the so-called engineering group. Tim Hall led engineering, and a guy named Bob Berkovitz led
Science,
research.
yeah.
And Bob was a kind of a mentor of me. You might know him because he's
Oh, yeah.
famous for the Alison Berkovitz paper about loudspeakers in rooms.
Right.
And so Berkovitz was running one and Hall was running the other. And there was a lot of tension. You know, engineering resented the ivory tower people in research. They felt, you know, they didn't have all the pressure on them to produce, you know, 70 products a year. And there was a lot of internal tension. And the 9 was designed to be collaborative, to get Tim to work with Bob. And so the research department contributed things like the acoustic blanket, the vertical array, impulse response kind of stuff, the way that the 9 did the crossover on the woofer, the so-called turbo on the woofer. So there were all these contributions from research, but ultimately engineering was the group that puts the products together for sale. So Tim, I attribute the 9 to a combination of Tim and Berkovitz.
Okay. Is Tim from Australia? Was he from
No,
Australia?
Tim is British.
Oh, British. Okay.
He was running engineering in England. And when Ron Fone came over, he brought him over as an English compatriot to help him run the US. That's my memory.
I guess, as you can see, Ken, would be a fascinating guest, but I guess we should stop talking.
Yeah.
Because I think more people than us will want to share in this information you're giving us.
Yeah.
Well, as long as you prompt me with these questions, I can talk
I know,
forever.
it's my fault. I apologize.
No, you took that the wrong way. I'm really relieved because otherwise I don't really know where to go with this. So I don't mind telling stories.
Oh,
Well,
yeah,
I make them up as I go. Who do you want to know about?
You sound like George Santos.
Tom Farazola, you visited Oregon recently. We hope you talk about that, do an open forum. Can't hear you, Tom. You're muted.
Why don't we wait till 7:02?
Yeah, there were there were 2 Oregon performances I went to recently, both in Philly since I live.
You don't have to answer now. Just do an open forum. I'm just
Should wait till 7:05 anyway.
Alvin, this is Ken. I attended the Consumer Electronics Show. Shall I plan on a presentation in the next 2 months or so?
of course.
You have our deepest sympathies, Ken.
That'd be fantastic. Wow. Do an open forum. Give us a 30-second overview of what you saw. Not of what you saw, but the direction of CES, I guess.
Sure.
Like for
No, we
example,
have to remain silent for Lent for 2 more minutes.
okay.
By the way, wasn't Bob Berkovitz one of the co-founders of Acoustic Research?
No,
No. The
not
name rings a very
close.
loud bell.
Well, he was a
No, that's
key
a dim
person
bell
there.
with you, Alan.
I'm sorry, Ken, what did you say?
the founders, to my memory, of AR were let's see, Hoffman and Lowe and Vilcher and Henry and Close.
Belcher was the founder, period. End of paragraph. He had
Well-
small financial backing from the ones that Ken mentioned. And Henry, his student, did become a co-joiner, and Henry was a cabinet maker, so he helped make cabinets out of Harvard Square, but Edgar
That's how they
Belcher
wound
really,
up on
it really is
Thorndike
his
Street.
baby.
I thought that's.
Yeah, I mean, having been through a couple of startups now, it's a collaborative process. I think there's no question that Vilcher was the brain trust and the original, the original idea, but I tend to give people a lot of credit in, people who help in those situations. You don't do it yourself. I mean,
No,
people say,
they get plenty of credit when you read about it.
oops, somehow I lost you.
Yeah, I don't know what happened
Yeah,
here.
right.
And I'm seeing, it looks like I'm seeing somebody's screen.
Yeah, someone switched to screen share.
Oh, okay, that's what happened, okay. Who
Put it out.
did that?
Pinch to do something, I'll pinch myself.
Well, whoever recognizes their desktop can
Who's
just
moving the
turn off
mouse?
sharing.
Somebody's moving the mouse.
Yeah, this person who shared the screen.
They may still be on
Oy vey.
mute.
Yeah, this is Tom. I think it might be me. It just,
Just click on share screen again or at the top, it should tell you to stop sharing.
Let's see if we can dive into.
Yeah.
It says you are viewing C. Cabe's screen.
Yeah,
So
let's see
whoever
if we can
Steve
dive into
Dave-
Horrell's computer.
Unbelievable.
do I want to exit this?
Yeah,
It's-
exit screen share.
It's C. Cabe.
Yeah.
There we go.
There you go.
There we
Okay.
go.
Okay,
Perfect.
I didn't do anything. It just happened.
Ah, the wonders of Microsoft.
So that's a good thing. Let me try that because one of the things that I wanted to know was if I share things, how does that look?
You got to choose the window you want to share.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna try it and see if it works.
And do you have any audio that you want us to hear? You have to click on the lower left.
No, I didn't do anything like that, but I'm
Okay.
just, for some reason. So can you see that?
yes,
Yes,
Well, it's black. You're not sharing anything.
Well, I think I am. It
No.
says,
No, it just went black.
Did you select the window you want to share first?
I
before you?
certainly did.
Well, oh,
How
there
about
it is.
now?
Selected KLA.
yeah, it says selected KLK products.
And is it changing in real time?
Yeah,
Yes,
but
it is.
it's very small. It's like a postage stamp on the screen.
Okay, well, I don't know what to do
Now
about
it's
that.
You
not.
just fixed it. Wait a minute, it's back again. Whatever
Yeah,
you
well,
did.
I'm turning on a magnifier, but I have to hold it down when I do that.
Well, is this a PowerPoint you're showing us, or what is it?
No, it's just there, I made a couple of JPEGs.
Well, you'll have to magnify it or else we can't read it.
That's okay. You don't need to read it. There'll be a quiz.
In decades.
One thing you can do if you're an expert at this is to go into
There it's big
screen
then.
share and share part of screen. It's under advanced. So if all these pictures are the same size, you can have them all just automatically show. full, as big as they can get.
Or make your slideshow show full screen or something.
How about now?
There, it's bigger.
Much better.
Okay. So I think I figured out how to do it. I'm not an expert. This is my first time sharing a screen.
We're all a bunch of amateur system managers.
Okay, so now how do I turn off stop screen share? And now-
Yeah, you did.
Just did.
Oh, great.
Yeah, we're all
This isn't
learning.
that hard.
Are we ready to go?
Yeah, are we having open forum?
I declare the meeting open. Open forum.
Okay, well, I have a question. Concert next Saturday afternoon. Is anyone interested in recording a concert?
What is it? Where is it?
First Parish Church, Universalist Unitarian in Waltham. It's the Joyful Voices of Inspiration, which is a gospel choir with piano.
Saturday?
Saturday, yes. March 4th. I'd be interested in shooting video and syncing it up with the audio recording as I did back in 2009 when Al Foster recorded. And Al is recording a concert Saturday evening. I don't think he probably wants to schlep his equipment from one concert to the other on the same day. But there are others here who record. Very simple setup. I can provide you with access to pair of balanced line level inputs from pair of microphones that hang in the sanctuary in an ideal location. Plug in your recorder. Hearing nothing, I pass. Unless it's someone who's muted and was talking.
Just why couldn't the video crew just bring a small recorder and attach it to the inputs in the back?
Okay, well, I'm the video crew and I don't know that I have a recorder that will take that kind of input.
Recording in progress.
Ooh,
Oh,
Sorry.
so it
Yeah,
would be good to have more than one person working on this.
Al, you wanted me to mention about my 2 organ experiences lately. The first one was the Wanamaker organ at Macy's, which is the largest organ in the world. It's got, I think, over 28,000 pipes. It's in the downtown Macy's store, which is 7 stories high. The RT60 in the room is 5 seconds. I think they've got 175 horsepower running the air pumps on it. And every day except Sunday, they have 2 performances which are free, one at noon and one at 5:30. So I took a run down there for one of the noontime performances, and I actually listened to the organ at 3 different levels: the ground level, the first floor, and then the second floor. And at the ground level, it was a little bit disappointing because I think I was getting a lot of early reflections off the floor, and it was sort of muddying up the sound a little bit. The first Obergeschloss, the first upper floor was better, and the second upper floor, which is floor 3, was even better still. And that was basically right in line with the main ranks of pipes in the organ. Absolutely amazing experience. For free every day. down at Macy's.
Now, is this in New York or in Chicago?
It's in Philadelphia.
Oh, Philadelphia.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I moved to Philadelphia about 2 years ago.
Okay.
The nice thing about Philadelphia too, since I'm in the old fart category now, I get free rides anywhere on the trains and the buses. So, and free parking at the train station. So it costs me nothing to go in. And it's pretty amazing. The second one is they were having a free organ day at the Kimmel Center, also in Philadelphia. And in the Verizon Hall, they have an organ which is the largest manually operated organ. It is the Fred J. Cooper Memorial Organ. And that only has 10,000 10 pipes, so, you know, not quite as big, but still a very impressive hall. And again, I sat on the second row back on the second tier, right in front of the pipes, and it was really quite impressive. The thing that's interesting is usually when I go to that venue, I sit down in the orchestra and there's more sense of immediacy and detail on the orchestra. And when you're up there on the higher floor, the brass tends to be a little bit overpowering the strings, where if you're on the orchestra floor, you're closer to the strings than the brass, but different strokes for different folks. In either case, wonderful performances, and kudos to Philadelphia and the Philadelphia Orchestra and Kimmel Hall for doing these free performances. Now, the other performances I went to, I had to pay, of course, but this one was for free.
Who operated the manual organ? Who pumped it?
There were at for the Wanamaker organ, you can look it up online. There are about 6 different organists that play. Conte is the head organist, but he wasn't playing the day I was there.
Who is? You said the Kimmel is manually operated. Does that mean?
Yeah, it's not electrically operated. The Wanamaker is electrically operated. And that was all the connections are done.
How many people did it take to create the wind?
Pardon?
How many people did it take to create the wind?
Oh no, they have motorized blowers to create the wind. That's the links, I guess, from the console to the controls, whatever they are. I'm not an organ person.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah, our manual were the 28,000 pipes and effects on the Wanamaker are done electrically.
Yeah, it's a
So it's
tracker organ.
mechanical, not manual.
Referred to.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I believe there's an even larger organ in Atlantic City at Convention Hall, and that the Wanamaker was the second largest organ. I remember reading decades ago.
The Wanamaker was originally done for Kansas City at one of the World's Fairs.
Sesquicentennial.
Yeah, and then they moved it. It took, I think, 7 railroad cars to move it to Philadelphia, and it has grown. It has grown since then. In fact, the whole top floor of the Macy's building is a workshop to maintain the organ and restore it. Very interesting.
They did make it larger, but I do remember Convention Hall in Atlantic City might be larger.
Yeah, I don't know. It was whatever it was incredibly impressive.
But the space at Wanamaker's, just as an architectural space, that huge space going up 7-8 stories.
Yes, it's fantastic.
And the big brass or bronze bird at the bottom, where everybody meets, if it's still there.
Well, I've got to tell you though, the Verizon Hall and the Kimmel is actually quite good. I think the acoustics are good. It's not overly large, but it's large enough that you get a good sense of space. And I've enjoyed the performances there.
Well, I was just reacting because I was once an architect in Philadelphia, and we used to just love to go there, listen to the organ, and look up at that enormous space. It seems so appropriate for a huge organ, physically.
Yeah, and it does sound quite good in there. But it was interesting, the significant difference in the sound at the different levels.
Yeah,
And now you'll have to get out to Mesa, Arizona, and listen to the Organ Stop Pizza Wurlitzer. It's the largest operating Wurlitzer, I believe, at least in the U.S. And it's a pizza shop, only it's not a shop. It's a full auditorium, and it's for real. I've been there, and it's impressive. They have just about every gadget that was ever attached to a Wurlitzer, from kettle drums and chimes and horns, brass. It is and the console itself is on a turntable that comes up out of the floor when you're there. And they give organ concerts usually, I believe at least, I know they do it on weekends, but you can look it up on the web. It's called Organ Stop Pizza. And you walk into the building, which is quite large, and there's a pizza shop kind of in the one end of it. And then you get your pizza and you walk out and sit down in a long series of tables, basically. And the organ is at the far end opposite the pizza sales area. And it sounds like a joke, but it's an amazing instrument to hear. And they do have a balcony. You can get up on
The
the
organ
second
was
level.
great. However, the pizza was mediocre.
Yes, I agree.
You answered a question I was going to ask it.
What is interesting is you are able to get a reasonable facsimile of a grand organ in your room if you do it properly. And there's no doubt every time I go hear live recordings, you can only get a reasonable facsimile if you're careful in the room. But in the room behind me now, it's a 16 by 20-foot room, and I've got 4 12-inch woofers in the main speakers, plus I have 4 10-inch distributed subs, and even the 18 hertz note on the BAS Sansaw test disc, it is considerable. Alan, you've heard it, and it's very much like real.
Also, I'd like to welcome Michael Riggs. He's sort of looking away at this time. I'm mentioning Michael Riggs because he was our former editor and he used to live in Boston. Then he decided to move to New York. Michael, do you want to say anything, Mike Riggs?
Hi, Michael. How are you?
He's
Go on
muted.
mute.
You're muted, Michael.
Hit your space bar to unmute.
Uh-oh.
Michael, you're still muted. How long did you edit the BAS newsletter?
Can
you hear me now?
You're on.
Yeah.
Okay, you're live.
Oh, I don't remember. It was a long time ago. Yeah.
It was probably too long, right, Michael?
No, I enjoyed it at the time. I couldn't do it now. I'm against work now, but it was fun.
Well, you went on to edit Audio Magazine, wasn't it? Or Stereo Review? Or
I started at High Fidelity.
High Fidelity?
I was at High Fidelity, and then after Diamandis bought High Fidelity and folded it into Stereo Review, and then I went to Stereo Review, and then eventually I went from that to editing audio, which was not my best move, and then audio folded, and then I was kind of out doing other stuff for a while, and then I came back and I worked on Sound and Vision's buying guide and website for a while. So I was all those over the years.
Are you retired now or what?
Yes.
Okay.
Michael, you edited me, what, 4 or 5 times?
Yeah.
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 It was always fun working with you.
Yeah. You wrote a few things for audio, including our big 50th anniversary issue, which was
Also for High Fidelity.
Did you write for High Fidelity too?
I thought I wrote a couple of general purpose tech
Maybe you did.
articles.
Maybe you did. I don't. It's that boy.
That's all a blur.
It's a long time ago.
Yeah.
Question, is anyone else taking notes on the meeting besides me?
It's being recorded, I think.
Yeah.
It is,
being
it is,
recorded.
but I could possibly create the meeting summary, but if someone else is doing it, then I will stop.
I don't know that anybody's actually doing that. I'm taking a few notes, but if you're welcome to write up the meeting if you want. Nobody else has approached me on it.
I've been known to do that for previous
Yeah,
meetings.
please, God, do.
Please do.
Please, God, that's not me.
That was always one of the hardest
Yes,
things.
that's
about
always
editing.
directed toward you.
Speaking of writing, I'm finishing up the next issue of the BAS Speaker. It features an article by a BAS member, Philip Newell, and he writes about his experiences of recording the Mahler Second Symphony with Leonard Bernstein in Ely Cathedral in England with Janet Baker. And it's a long way from being a purist recording. It was recorded on 16 channels. Plus there was also video done for television production. But it's quite an interesting article, and the issues are coming out on time. So I'll continue for the time being.
Yeah, I think Lenny used the, oh God, I can't remember his name. He was one of the producers from Columbia Records. And he became kind of the official guy, and he was very much steeped in multi-microphone techniques. And even the release, he worked originally, I think, with Columbia.
Was that John McClure?
Might have been, yeah. And he was the guy that basically set up and did most of the recording for the Bernstein concerts, except, I guess, for the ones that were done by Deutsche Grammophon. Those may have been somebody different. But for the Columbia recordings back in the early days, it was incredible multiple mono. I have a remastered set of the Mahler symphonies he did with the New York Phil. And they're wonderful performances, and they're really good performances, but they are very weirdly laid out. If you listen to them on imaging and placement, things are very strange. And it's because of the multiple mono and the fact that I don't think any of the post-production engineers who mastered the CDs had any idea what they were trying to do with it, or it was just a major effort to take the multi-track recordings, which I think were at least 8 or 16 channels, and try and put it all back together, because I suspect there was like a 32 channel console doing a premix before it even got recorded. But yeah, I think it was John McClure. That name does ring that name also, like Berkovitz, rings a bell.
I posted in the chat a couple of links. One of them was to a 60-minute piece from about a month ago that Hans Zimmer was featured, and people who are interested in movie soundtracks and production, you might want to catch that, and it'll link you to the YouTube video. And the most recent one he did was, of course, the last Top Gun movie, which was phenomenally well done, the soundtrack, I think. And the next link I put was to Groton Hill Music Center. It's a new place. You take a look at it, just opened up. My sister and her husband had gone there, and they enjoyed it. I was wondering if anybody would be, I'm going to go there eventually. I was waiting until maybe the weather got a little better. And I was wondering if anybody might be interested in taking a trip, with a few of us up there, or all of us, whoever wanted to go to, check out the place and see how it is.
No, we should do a meeting there. There's a big write-up on it in the classical site that I help with, that I will post. But we should definitely do a meeting there.
Well, I'll tell you, I went to a concert there and I was very disappointed.
Oh, good.
When did you go, Nicholas? When was this?
A couple of weeks ago.
Oh, really?
I went to see the Brandenburg. It was labeled, it was Handel and Haydn Society. They were doing the Brandenburgs, they said, but it wasn't all the Brandenburgs like they normally do. It was 3 Brandenburgs and 2 violin concertos by Bach.
Was it the performances that weren't good, or the acoustics that weren't good, or what was the bad experience, or everything?
Several things. The floor was dirty.
Oh.
Dust bunnies, candy, torn up strips of paper. They have no paper programs. It's all electronic. You get one of those ink blot things you got to scan with your phone. So you're dependent, 1,000 people, whatever that holds, dependent on Wi-Fi there, right?
Yeah.
This is the Brandenburgs. There are between 5 and 11 performers playing period instruments. They're in the middle of the stage, which is very large for that. There's no bass, none. The two low strings of the bass violin or the cello are gone, completely gone, missing. The location, you could tell where the players were. That was fabulous. I was in row B. I couldn't believe my luck because that's where I like to be. But no bass, but the location was great. The PA system was terrible. A woman came out and made some announcements, just woo, like they forgot to turn on the treble amplifiers in a biamp or something. I mean, it was shocking. So
This is fascinating.
Maybe they need to see a review by you, and maybe they need to see a review.
well, I was gonna write that up with also going to Jordan Hall and also going to Mechanics Hall. I couldn't get into Sanders, so all for the same Handel and Haydn Brandenburg's concerto. Hey, Richard. So
Hi.
the Jordan Hall was good. Mechanics Hall was the best.
Yeah, Mechanics Hall out in Worcester has some excellent acoustics.
I hadn't been in the big hall. I've been in the Washburn room or whatever for small performance, but the big hall was very nice.
Yeah, from my days way back in the savage days of youth when I was a student at Worcester Tech, the Detroit Symphony came through and they did some performances that were just absolutely stunning in that hall. And I've also done some minimal recording in there many moons ago. I don't even remember what it was for, probably a high school group or something. And it's a very nice hall.
I was surprised. It's basically a rounded rectangle, and I thought it would be very reverberant, but it has a nice RT. The sound was clear. I was in row E there on the floor. So
Are we talking about halls? Has anybody been in? I was in Symphony Hall recently for the first time in 10 or 20 years. And the sound sounds very different to me now than it did the last time I was there. And I think it's because there's this protrusion at the front of the stage, so that there's no longer a proscenium. There's no longer a sense of the there's no longer a sense of the orchestra in another world and you are in the audience. Now the orchestra is in your face, and I guess everybody is further away from the walls behind them because there seems to be much less space in the sound in the hall than I remember with last time I was, but I've been listening to my stereo system so long, I don't know if that's changed my calibration. But I don't know if anybody just notices where the Symphony Hall sounds the way it used to sound now that the orchestra is sitting. The first three or so rows of seats are gone, and the stage comes out in a bow towards the audience with the conductor practically sitting next to you.
yeah, they extended the stage.
Yeah.
They did the floor before in front of the stage as well, I think.
Yeah, I know, but I haven't been there since last time I was there was, when Seiji Uzawa was there.
Yeah.
So
I think the hall has a stage extension capability to begin with, and it sounds like that's what they put in and made it semi-permanent.
yeah, but the sound is different. I don't hear there's much reverb overhead. I don't hear the sound is much thinner, and I hear too much reverb around. Or in row N, pretty close, and the sound is thin, and the hall doesn't reverb the way I remember. But that may just be age. I don't know.
Yeah, because I remember John Allen was talking about, the other John Allen was talking about, they took the blackout covers down from the upper arched windows and replaced the windows were pretty bad shape, I guess, from wood rot and so forth. So they replaced those, but that was like a dozen years ago, I believe. And he did indicate that the acoustics had changed dramatically. He thought for the better at the time. But as I say, that was like probably 10, 12 years ago when they did that. And they did redo the stage about the same time, I think, but they went through hoops trying to get the right materials and age it properly and so forth to basically rebuild the stage surface So it was identical with what was originally put in.
Okay,
But beyond that, I don't know what else has been done. Like you, Richard, I haven't been there in years. The last hall I was in was the Barbara Mann Performance Center down in Fort Myers, Florida. And that's a nice hall. I was impressed. They were performing this. I think I mentioned this at the last BAS meeting I was at. They did a very good performance, full orchestra, Southwest Florida Symphony. And it was actually a pleasant experience, unlike some of the halls I've been in where you kind of cringe, either from the playing or from the acoustics. And in this case, it was pleasant both ways. It was a good performance, and the hall was really, really nice. And it looks like it's one of these flexible halls, but it has, again, everything in the area behind the proscenium. And they have reflectors and stuff. And it's a multi-purpose hall, apparently, because it's part of one of the Florida universities. But the acoustics were excellent.
I guess none of us is going to get there, though.
Yeah.
Has anyone been?
Critical race theory.
I'm sorry.
What?
Nothing. Never mind. Never mind.
Has anyone been to the redesigned Geffen Hall in Manhattan? It has gotten rave reviews, but I haven't been there. And I was just wondering if anybody has been to a performance there.
Oop.
Guess not.
Guess that.
I actually read some stuff where they said it was okay, but it wasn't as good as it could be. But they basically done, apparently, like Symphony Hall, they put a hall within the building. They've actually put the building within the existing outframe of the building, like Symphony Hall, which has, a corridors around the actual performance space to try and isolate it.
Yeah, the
But
reviews
that's
have not
because there
been
were horses
uniform
there.
raves.
Huh? There were
The reviews
horses
have-
there.
The
Go ahead.
reviews have not been uniform raves.
Hmm.
Anybody else? Okay, well, let's start the regular part of our meeting.
I just wanted to throw out that
I had one more comment. I can recall hearing the first concert from Avery Fisher Hall in New York. At the time, WQXR FM there had what they called the WQXR network, where they sent it out as far as Buffalo, New York, and Washington, D.C. by relaying from one FM station to another. And if you can imagine, well, we all know how unsatisfactory the original Avery Fisher Hall was. You can imagine how it sounded by the time it got to Baltimore with distortion and ignition noise.
Yeah, and the volume
Quite the
axes and
thing.
the automaxes that were used at the time to compress and limit the audio going through the station systems. Jack Reed, you were going to say something.
I'm just going to point out that from my earliest memories, and I can't give you the date, but I just wanted to throw out that what is now Geffen Hall, originally Philharmonic Hall, they always had a lot of space between the auditorium box within the exterior building. And even when you're outside, between the auditorium and the exterior, I'll call it the weather box, the exterior box, it was pretty quiet even in that expansive space. Some people would occasionally walk around out there, and you never got it inside the hall. At least I didn't the few times I was in there. I do remember a concert, I think Robert Kraft conducted some music by Stravinsky, and I pointed out Stravinsky's widow up in the side balcony, and we all stood and clapped or something like that. But that's one thing they did get right, is keeping the The noise from the intersection of Broadway and 65th Street, which can be considerable. It's not the worst intersection in New York, but it's 42nd and Lexington is usually much worse. But they did get that right. They're still trying to get the rest of it right. And I'm 84, and I'm not sure it'll happen in my lifetime, but I'm so far down on the high end, had another audiogram within the past 6 months or so. It'll be wasted on me, but I've already learned to sit way back in the hall so that I'm not blasted. But that's a little firsthand testimony from that particular site. I frankly didn't think Avery Fisher was so awful, but my reference point is really at the bottom of my scale. It's called Orchestral Hall, and it stands on Michigan Avenue in Chicago, where the acoustics have been so bad that the one side of the orchestra doesn't hear the other side, and the musicians, being musicians, orchestral musicians, they never tell a guest conductor. They let him figure it out for himself, and figure out what to do about it. Nice bunch of guys, right? But there's a happy ending in this little part of the story. Bostonians can be proud that for many years I've lost my contacts with the people who know orchestral players, but going back up to a couple of decades ago, the record holder for speed and figuring out what the problem was and solving it with his stick. Bostonians should be proud that the man's name is Seiji Ozawa. He got it and got it quickly. He had technical chops. I think certainly compared with Fritz Reiner, and the difference, another difference is that Ozawa made music and Reiner demonstrated technique, and he often ignored the composer's directions. I used to sit in there and follow score while he played, and I was very disappointed. But anyway, I ramble a bit. But Ozawa was the man, and he had enjoyed several seasons at the Ravinia Festival north of Chicago, where the orchestra, we thought, deteriorated while Jean Martineau was conducting downtown. He only had got one contract. And then we would go up north of the city and listen to the orchestra come back to itself with Ozawa on the stage. Fine man. I don't know what his life is like now. Maybe you can fill me in, but I rambled a bit. But yeah, okay. I'm going to shut up now.
Thank you. That was great.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Well, let's start the meeting. I'm very honored to announce that our guest is Ken Kantor, and if you don't know the name, you should. I learned of it first in the NHT days because I was interested in a woofer from NHT called the 1259, which was one of the first serious subwoofers. So anyway, without any further ado, Ken.
Well, hi, thanks for having me here. You know, I've done a lot of these things over the years, but there's always been an organizing principle. I was always selling something or working on something. And it's a lot harder to just figure out how to talk about your whole life. You know, there's a lot of different directions I could go. And I don't have a prepared commentary, so I'd like it to be as interactive as possible, meaning I welcome questions and interruptions and arguments. And, you know, hey, it's the Boston Audio Society. If nobody argues, I will, you know, I'll feel like I failed. And, so what I thought I'd do is just kind of give people a quick overview of the arc of my career and the phases of it and what I was thinking about in each of those phases. And then we can just, either interrupt me in real time, or we can go back and discuss some of the things that I'm talking about. And I think what'll happen is, as we get closer and closer to the current time, my views will become more and more controversial. And so by the time I get to the recent decisions I've made and things I'm working on, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of energized commentary. So that's how I hope it works. But again, we were talking before people joined, we were having a nice conversation about the history of AR and various people there and where they went. And, I love telling stories, so that's fine too. If people have questions, I'll answer them. If I don't know, I'll just make it up. I love telling stories about people I don't know. If anybody wants their biography rewritten, I can do that in real time. But let me dig into my background. I was born in 1956 in Downingtown, Pennsylvania, to displaced New York parents. And my first, when I moved to New York in time to go to grade school, and consider myself kind of an East Coast guy. I grew up in New York and then moved to Boston and lived there for many years before I wound up out here. When I was 6, my dad, who was a STEM type, a chemist, chemical engineer, sat me down and decided to teach me electronics parts, what they did. And one of the things that he taught me was that resistors block the flow of electricity, right? That's what their job were. They were like valves. And about 6 months later, he had bought a new stereo, or built it. I think it was a Bogan amplifier. And he explained to me that the job of an amplifier was to make the electrical signal bigger. That's kind of the way he talked to a 6-year-old. So when he was at work, I got the brilliant idea, definitely, this would have been on the internet if there had been an internet there, that I should remove all the resistors from his new stereo. Because what were they thinking? The resistors were blocking the sound. The amplifier was, designed to make the sound bigger. And so that's what I did. I took out my diagonal cutters, or his diagonal cutters, and I removed every single resistor from the new amp.
As a scientist, you never questioned maybe there's a purpose?
No, not as a 6-year-old scientist.
Oh,
I
6
didn't.
years old, okay.
And you're still alive.
Well, it was close. I was going to say it definitely taxed my father's commitment to anti-capital punishment.
You're gonna have to take this act on the road, that.
So that was my first, and it kind of inspired me to learn a little bit more about audio. And I just became an enthusiast. I think probably like everybody on this call, I read the magazines and I tinkered and I tried to build speakers out of leftover things I found thrown out on the, on the street. And, but I didn't really know what I was doing. And I decided to maybe study electrical engineering and sound. So because music was very important to me and I really loved audio. And the summer before I went away to college from New York to Boston, I was visiting a friend in another city. And I happened to walk into the first high-end store that I'd ever been in, you know, really what we'd call a tweaky boutique audio store. And they were playing some quad electrostatics in there. And I had been brought up on the, you know, on the AR notion of accuracy. You know, that stuff you read in the magazine. We're going to do this kind of frequency response, pink noise at 1 meter, blah, 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 all this stuff. And I thought that's, you know, to me, when I sat in front of an AR3A or something like that, that was the height of musical accuracy. That was the sine qua non of reproduction. And all of a sudden, I found myself sitting in front of these electrostatic speakers, and I heard all kinds of things that I didn't hear from the conventional dynamic box speakers. And that, you know, you ever see the robot on Lost in Space when you give it a command, it can't follow, and it's, you know, smoke starts coming out of its head, it does not compute. I couldn't figure out why, if I knew all this stuff and all these smart people were saying this is what makes a speaker good. Well, now here is a speaker that was good in totally different ways. It paid very little attention to those traditional values that I knew. And that bothered the heck out of me. I mean, that really bugged me. What was it that we were missing in speaker specifications? Because, you know, I wanted to be a rationalist. I wanted to believe you could measure things and characterize them. But here I was seeing that the measurements were incomplete. The measurements that I had grown up with just weren't characterizing particularly things to do with imaging. And that became a kind of a quest in the first phase of my career. I went to MIT. I studied in the electrical engineering department and wound up working in what's called the CJ LaBelle labs there, which was a hotbed of audio activity.
Did you know that Davis? Did you know Mark Davis then?
Mark was a mentor to me in electronics, in circuit design, and I did I helped him on the Davis Brinton preamp and on his Nerd. Yeah, I know that world very well.
Great.
I have a question. Maybe
Yeah.
we'll be getting to this, but to what do you attribute the difference in sound of the electrostatics? I mean, for one thing, obviously they produce a plane wave coming out of the speaker, which results in a constant flat plane of waveform coming out. So the diffusion is much different from that of any.
Well, you know, this became the mission of my research at MIT, and I began to theorize that a lot had to do with radiation pattern, and early reflection, and basically things. Looking at the impulse response in different regimes. You have a regime of the impulse response that's very, you know, sub-millisecond or sub a couple of milliseconds, and that creates a certain type of localization. Then you have early reflections, reflections from the floor and the wall, and they are within the fusion time of the ear, so they're not. And I assume people know what I mean when I say that. You know, in the same way as if things happen very quickly to your eye, in your eyes, like frames of a film, the brain ceases to be able to process them as discrete information and fuses them together into a continuous experience. And that happens in sound also. If you get reflections that are too quick after the original sound, the brain has no way to know what the original sound, the direct sound is, and what the reflected sound is. And I think it has a lot to do with that. But I'll talk more about that over time.
And what time frame, what year was this?
Let's see, I went to college in 74. So I was thinking about it in 74 when I went, and 75, 76. I think my my undergraduate thesis was in 76 or 77. Is when I started it, and my undergraduate thesis was called a psychoacoustically optimized loudspeaker, and it was a loudspeaker that contained had variable directivity and variable delay. And so this would have been mid to late 70s.
You remember which electrostatic it was?
I'm sorry, I can't, you're cutting out.
Do you remember which electrostatic it was? Because the ESL 63 had very different dispersion than most electrostatics.
Yeah, no, I don't remember, but I think it was the earlier panels.
Okay.
But they were quads. You were saying they were quads.
Yeah, I believe so.
The 57.
Sounds right.
And you studied acoustics at MIT under Dr. Bose, right?
Well, he was one of my professors, yes. He wasn't my thesis advisor, but he was a professor of mine.
And that you were saying that mockingly, I think.
Who was?
When you, as though, because Bose, of course, was more into the reflected sound than the direct sound. I never.
Oh no, I hold him in very high esteem.
Oh, good.
I think he got a few things wrong, and I mean, obviously got a lot right. I don't say that condescendingly. I think that, you know, he and I argued a lot. Not some, you know, he still offered me a job, but I think he was a very important guy in both the commerce of audio and the technology. I just think that he, you know, when you're talking about music in a home listening room, the path lengths are so much less than they are in a concert hall that the equations about direct and reflecting have to be reconsidered. You know, you have to reconsider how you're going to deal with reflections if they arrive within the so-called fusion time of the year. Let me continue, because there's a lot to cover, and then we can get back to this stuff. So let's see. After I finished my undergraduate, I changed directions and I joined the Center for Advanced Visual Studies, which was a part of an activity at MIT, which eventually became the Media Lab. So I became interested in art and media theory and stuff having to do with, you know, more sociology and less hardcore technology. After graduation, like the week I was going to graduate, I got a little a note in the mail that said, "Hey, do you want to come work in London for NAD?" You know, we heard about some of the amps work you had done, and I moved to London and worked there. And although I had done a lot of work at AR as an undergraduate, you know, AR funded my thesis work. You know, MIT demands a thesis from electrical engineering students, but they don't give you any money as an undergraduate. You're on your own. And most people just do theoretical thesis, you know, just a written thesis. But I wanted to build stuff. And so I needed speaker parts, and somebody in the lab I was working in said, hey, call AR, why not? And I did, and I wound up meeting Bob Berkovitz there, who invited me to come down, and I couldn't believe it. I mean, walking into a speaker factory, I mean, everybody remembers what speakers are like when you're an undergraduate. They're like your most prized possession. And here I am, and I'm walking around a warehouse, 100,000 square foot factory with pallet racks of speakers everywhere you look, and it was just like, nirvana. And I wound up doing a lot of work for them, working in their labs and whatnot, but I was still a student. But working at NAD was my first taste with the real world. This isn't a research project. We've got to get this stuff out the door. We've got to work with a factory to make it. And so I worked there for a while, came back to AR after that and worked on something called the ADSP, which was originally a Berkovitz idea. And he worked with a guy named Ron Genero to develop what was probably the world's first audio digital signal processor. Back in the days when that wasn't very easy to do. And I worked on that, mostly on the filter designs for that. And, AR was going through a difficult time then, and was talking about closing the research department. They were just, they were just looking for ways to cut costs. And I remember going to the president and saying, hey, you funded research of mine when I was an undergraduate. Let me run the research department for a year and let's try to turn some products out that are higher tech. And to their credit, they said, sure, go for it. And the first thing I did was develop a little stereo remote control box, which was an add-on unit, very high quality, that you could add to your stereo to give it remote control capability. And this proved to them, it didn't change the fate of the company, but it proved to them that the stuff that goes on at R&D, in this case, the development of a digital signal processor, could be monetized. And the next thing we did was to say, what about all this work on speakers you did with radiation patterns and imaging and impulse response? And that eventually turned into something called the MGC1 Magic Speaker. And that was really kind of my first big thing at AR. That was my first, this is kind of put me on the map, and it helped put them on the map. Let's see if I have a picture of that. Maybe I do. Yeah. Okay, first attempt to share a screen. How do I do that?
There's a on the row under your picture.
Yeah, no, the problem is getting that and getting the right screen open behind this.
Yeah, right. I may give you a choice when you click on it. Which screen do you want to share?
Open the picture.
Yeah, I
first.
got it. You did something right just there.
Okay, do
I
you see
just
it?
posted a picture of it.
It says Kenneth Cantor has started screen sharing on my second monitor, but I don't see.
No,
Now I see Michael.
you stop sharing.
Ken, who was the president of AR then? I can't remember the name. I'm very bad on names
Ron
anymore.
Phone.
Ron Phone. I had a big fight with Ron Phone
Yeah.
about
Not as big a fight as I've had. Anyway, go on.
because he had promised me at one point that High Fidelity would get the first review of the MGC1, and then it went to stereo review instead, which I understand completely on a commercial point of view, but I felt like it was, like we got screwed. So we had a big fight over that. I remember that.
But how did he defend it?
Oh, he kind of dodged and weaved.
Oh.
Can
just-
people see what I've screen
Yep.
shared?
Oh, look at that.
Yeah, that's it.
So, one of my fond memories of AR, you gotta understand, I was a student up until, AR was my first real job. And, I was living on $100 a month in food and blah, 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 blah. And I'm working for AR and was it Stereo Review? Michael, who did Roman Bayer work with? He was Stereo Review, right?
Stereo Review, yeah.
Yeah, so Roman Bayer takes the
Here's the
AR
publisher.
crew out, which was Ron Fone and Alex DeCoster and me. He took out with Julian Hirsch and some ad rep to Le Cirque in New York, which was like the classiest of the classy restaurants back in those days. And he and Ron Fone proceeded to get into a drunken screaming match that pretty much got us thrown out of Le Cirque, where Roman Bayer took an $800,000 check, held it in Ron Fone's nose and said, "I'll rip your effing $800,000 check up now if you don't apologize to me." And it was crazy. And Julian and I were like hiding under the table.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, Roman, I remember Roman very well, yes.
Yeah, well. So anyway, the good old days.
What happened to the check? So what happened?
I didn't get it, but apparently Stereo Review got the cover. All right.
So tell us about the speaker. It's gorgeous.
Yeah, the speaker's very interesting. We should hear about that.
Yeah.
Well, the speaker had two parts. It had a direct field, which was basically used most of the parts of the AR9 or the 9LS. It used the dual dome, it used the mid-range, and it was designed to be an extremely good axial response. And that part of the speaker was covered in a foam, basically people call it a horn, but it's a foam absorber that very carefully controlled the radiation, the direct radiation, so that it minimized the amount of floor and ceiling and wall reflections you got. So if you listen to just the front part of the speaker, it was like listening to an electrostatic. It really was. Or headphones was another way that people would describe listening to just the front section. The other thing about the front section would become important to NHT is that we angled the speaker's front baffle. Let me explain why. Do people know the term interaural cross correlation?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's
Okay. It's a measure of how similar the sound is between the left ear and the right ear. And there's been a lot of studies that show that people prefer the sound of certainly live sound in concert halls if the interaural cross correlation is low. In other words, if there's big difference in the energy between your left and right ear. And that's fine. There have been a number of techniques to improve or reduce interaural cross correlation electronically. The so-called Carver sonic holography, the sound concepts IR, which IR 2100, I worked on quite a bit on the sound concepts version, the JVC biphonic processor. These are all ways to remove the left speaker from the right ear and the right speaker from the left ear, thereby improving or reducing the interaural cross correlation and expanding the soundstage.
Polcat speakers that were designed to do something like this in the speaker as opposed to electronic.
Exactly. What people don't realize or is under-realized is that if you take a source, single point source, and you move it around the person's head, okay, the interaural cross correlation is lowest when the source is directly to the side of your ear, right? Because you have a head shadow. And the interaural cross correlation is nominally 1 if the source is directly in front of you, because your ears are nominally hearing the exact same signal. However, it's not a monotonic decrease as you move the azimuth of the source. You don't just, the interaural cross correlation does not go from 1 down to some low value. What happens is it goes up and down with different angles. Am I making sense?
Yep.
And what the angle is for the minimum interaural cross correlation is depending on the person's head between 23 and 26 degrees. So if you place a source at 23 to 26 degrees, you will get more stereo separation than on either side of that angle. Am I clear so far?
Yep.
What's the angle again? What's the angle?
It varies for everybody's different head, but somewhere in the range of
Mid-20s.
23 to 26 degrees.
That's 23 to 26 degrees from straight ahead.
From straight ahead
Correct.
to, yeah.
Yes.
And doesn't that depend heavily on frequency?
It depends somewhat on frequency. I mean, it depends
not
on a lot
heavy.
of things. But, you know, what I'm talking about is a statistical measure. If you, for example, put a weighted pink noise signal and look at the cross correlation, you can make general purpose assessments of that. And sure, you know, every different frequency will have different behavior, but statistically they will come out right.
So that's essentially 45 degrees though. That adds up to an isosceles triangle.
And that's why we listen that way.
Yeah.
The
But
usual stereo
I also
separation is
said-
60 degrees.
Hmm?
The usual separation is 60 degrees, right?
Yeah,
what it
that's
does.
true. And one of the things we at NHT said is move your speakers a little closer together and you'll get a wider sound stage. And people would say, no, that's impossible. You know, if I move my speakers closer, how will I get a wider sound stage? But it works in general.
That's great.
Absolutely true.
Okay, thank you. Phew. I can't believe I didn't get an argument.
I'm a paid plan.
Hmm?
I'm a paid plan. I'm still getting residuals from AR.
Okay. So basically the AR speaker said, look, if people are going to listen to a speaker at, it doesn't, let's call it 60 or 45, whatever. If they're going to be listening to it, why are we making speakers square boxes where the axis of radiation goes past your head? We might as well aim the speaker at people correctly.
Yeah.
And so that was another thing that was introduced in the AR Magic Speaker. Now, I talked about the direct sound being very tightly controlled and a very, very clean impulse response. Maybe later I'll put up some of the, I should have done that, put up some of the impulse responses from the Magic Speaker. They're quite interesting. They don't look like typical speakers. But then what we did was we had a side firing speaker that filled in the room reverberation. Okay, but it had its own controller, meaning we could equalize the room separately from the direct sound, and we could add a delay to effectively move the nearby walls back. Okay. So the MGC1 was really an interesting platform for understanding and experimenting with reflections and radiation pattern, because in a typical speaker, if you EQ the direct sound, you are also EQing the reverberant sound,
Right.
and vice versa. If you want to EQ the room, you're messing up your direct sound. And, you know, companies like AR would say, well, it doesn't matter. Make the, you know, we don't hear the direct sound, make the steady state power response correct. And then companies like Quad or a lot of English companies said, no, you got it backwards. Make the direct sound really flat and let the room fall where it may, put some absorption in there, whatever. With the Magic Speaker, we said, why choose? If you want to have one EQ for the room and one EQ for the direct sound, that's fine. And that was the mission, the goal of that speaker.
That's great.
Did it succeed? A lot of people ask me that. Yes and no. And now I'll get into caddy politics, my favorite subject, and yours too. The MGC1 was a $3,900 speaker in 1980, whatever. AR made 200 pair and 200 pairs sold. That's a tremendous success in that price range. If you know the speaker business, especially in those days, that was a lot of money. But it was a tiny drop in the bathtub of AR's revenue. So did it succeed? It sold out. But the big problem with the MGC1, besides the price, was politics. I talked a lot about, oh, that's an interesting conversation. Before people joined, we were talking about the politics at AR. AR had a research department run by Bob Berkovitz, and it had a engineering department run by Tim Hall, and they didn't get along.
No.
Okay. They collaborated on the AR9. The AR9 was designed to be a collaboration between R&D and engineering to get the kids to play nice together. But as soon as the AR9 went away, the kids stopped playing nice together. You know, the engineers were under a lot of pressure to produce products, and us guys up in research did whatever we want, you know, Coke and strippers and R&D, you know, all that stuff. And when the MGC1 was announced, engineering was really concerned that it was going to upstage the AR9. There were huge battles about that. The AR9 is our flagship. We don't want a research department speaker being AR's top of the line. So what did they do? They took a $3,900 speaker with all this electronics and technology, and they put a pair of 8-inch woofers in it, instead of the 12s that had originally been designed in.
Oh.
So it was specifically would be second to the 9, which was a dumb idea, because now you were undermining the 9 by saying, look, we have all this technology in the Magic Speaker. Oh, but it only goes to, you know, 80 hertz or 70, 60 hertz. And then we have the AR9, which has, you know, the best bass of any speaker in history, but it doesn't have our modern technology in it. It doesn't image all that great. There's some weird stuff in the upper mid-range and blah, 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 blah.
Well, what
Do you
was
have
the
a
price
picture
of
of
the AR9 at that time?
Say that again?
What was the price of the AR9s at that time?
I don't remember.
Do you have a picture of the 9?
Wouldn't you just position those price-wise to have each speaker fill a certain niche?
We could talk about that ad infinitum. I'm
Okay.
only talking about what happened, not
Okay.
not,
What would have happened. Yeah,
not could have happened and
Yeah, I get
would
it.
have happened and, you know.
It's about, social status and the prestige of being the top. You don't get away from that
Right.
with price points.
It was under
there's also-
$1,000 each, excuse me. It started at around 700 and ended in the 80s at 900 or maybe a little more.
That sounds right. I was going to say they were about 2,000 a pair.
Yes,
my-
that's a little bit less. The bass was prodigious. And everyone in the industry knew that the MGC had been undercut. And Ken had been undercut specifically with these 2 8-inch woofers. And the MGC bass was fine, but it wasn't anything like the AR or even an Allison.
Yeah, it wasn't flagship bass.
Yes, that's the right word.
I'll tell you a story before I get to what I really want to talk about, which is I remember having lunch one time with Tim Hall and Alice DeCosta. And, I was said at some point, people still disagree on what it is a loudspeaker should do. And Alex immediately spoke up and said, I know exactly what a loudspeaker is supposed to do. It's supposed to put food on the table. But the thing is that there have been, the reason I thought Ken would be a good guest was because I think he's an interesting speaker designer. I've been lucky. I've got to meet a lot of people who design speakers, and some of them are interesting and some of them aren't. Some of them have interesting ideas and some of them are just, like getting some out the door. But most of the speakers that have been interesting in my life, which are quad, for example, or talk with DQ10 or Magic Speaker, or even the Bose 901, or
DBX.
There's something about the imaging, because
You know what? Can I interrupt you really quick?
Yeah.
I just did. Haha. It wasn't quads that I originally heard. It was DQ10s when they first came out.
that was a fascinating speaker when it came out.
Exactly.
Yes.
It definitely made me think. Sorry, go on.
No, it's true. That was the thing. It was like tonality is one thing, but the thing that tended to separate speakers that made people really interested in them was how they sounded spatially, which was not any kind of emphasis. Like when I first started getting interested in audio, that wasn't something that people thought about very much. It was just like, are you getting the tonality right? Which is sort of the whole AR thing. And
Yeah.
so, and the Magic Speaker I thought was a very interesting speaker in that regard.
You remember that there was a live versus AR concert at Carnegie Hall?
There were a bunch of them.
Yeah. And then,
I mean, sure.
yeah. So I asked people from AR on the Shop Talk show, well, if the speakers sound exactly like the performers in the hall, why would anybody ever go to a concert? And somebody from AR said, because of the hall. You don't go, you go to the concert hall to hear the hall. And that was one of the things that stopped me from being an audiophile and turned me into an ambiophile. Because, it's the hall we want to hear. Now, did you know Steve Goldstein at AR?
Of course.
Yeah, good. His speaker, which I have several pairs of, was designed to have perfect on-axis response and then a whole lot of extra stuff going to the room. And I don't know what he stole from the Magic Speaker, but
everything.
But okay. So I have several pairs, and they don't quite fit into my main system anymore, but they're really great. And
yeah, he knew what he was doing.
Yeah.
So AR had one of my favorite. AR had an advertising campaign that only went to their dealers. It never made it to their customers. But somewhere I still have a sticker that they gave out for all their dealers, and it said, I think Marty Borish did this one. I think it was pre-Ron Phone. It said, if God wanted us to hear live music, he would have given us tickets.
Right. Right.
That's a Velcher quote, by the way.
Yeah.
Uh,
And I thought that was, that kind of was, there was more to that than just a joke.
Right.
who is the guy at AR? I'm not like I said, I'm bad with names anymore. Long Island accent. Used to do Adventures in Sound.
Victor Campos.
I was gonna say Victor Campos.
Victor once took me in and did the whole setup. It was like AR-10 pies at the time, and they did a live versus recorded thing with a drum set. And what they did to make that work, it was like there were a lot of microphones, there was a lot of EQ, there was a lot of processing, and they made it work, but it wasn't like, it wasn't some simple thing.
I don't want to get into that. I mean, we could have a whole session on live versus recorded and its problems and what it does teach you and what it doesn't teach you. And, I mean, it's fun, but it's a 6-hour conversation.
But the idea of having a different regime for what your stereo information is versus from what your ambient information is, that's huge. That's a huge principle that makes you more of an ambiophile than an audiophile, because if you're just listening to stereo, perfect stereo, you've got one place in the room where it's perfect.
I agree. In fact, if we ever get to the NHT phase, I also did some live versus recorded stuff, but I did it a little differently. We had, the heir apparent in my career to the AR9 and the Magic Speaker was a product that NHT did called the 3.3, which was our flagship loudspeaker. Somebody mentioned the woofer, the NHT woofer was originally designed for that product. And what I did at a high-end show one year is we rented 2 hotel rooms on the same floor. And in one, we had a harpsichord and a violinist from the San Francisco Symphony and a singer. And in real time, we piped it into another room with the 3.3s playing the mic feed. So you could walk back and forth between the live sound and the reproduced sound. I won't say recorded, but reproduced sound in real time. And the first thing you learned is that they're different. You can't make them sound the same. No matter how good your speakers are, the way a speaker works is different than a natural source.
That was how the BBC tested speakers too.
Say that again?
The BBC did the same thing when they did your speakers, except 2 rooms next to each other.
Yeah.
One live.
My recollection is they did it with a lot more channels.
Probably.
The BBC work.
More money in those days.
Yeah, exactly.
But you never did a full MGC analog at NHT. It was never. It was always, Was that like just a commercial consideration, or was it
I
not
wanted
practical?
to.
Yeah.
I had the rights to do it because the technology went back to my thesis, my undergraduate thesis. And I gave that technology to AR to use, but I had the right to do it. The problem is, it was really commercial, I would say.
Yeah.
It was really a matter of, would it fit in our product line? Did we have the muscle to educate the market about it, et cetera? There's things that a company like AR can get away with because flagships, drive the bulk of the business. and the bulk of the business pays the rent. At a company like NHT, you know, we were successful, but we couldn't really throw a huge development and manufacturing effort at something that wasn't going to be producing revenue.
Well, AR was big back in those days, and NHT was never as big as AR was when AR was big.
We got close.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah,
Nobody was as big as when AR was big in the period we're not talking about. I mean, the 50s, AR was dominant.
it was dominant, but the market wasn't as big as you think.
Right. No, right. The boomers hadn't started to buy yet.
Right, right. It was a long time before AR broke 20 million.
Yeah.
Which is a hard to imagine in today's world. But that's true.
DBX was bought by BSR for like 10 million in 1978, which is just astounding to think about.
Yeah.
And for the next 10 years, probably regretted it.
Okay, so
So in that in that comparison of live and reproduced, did you do a survey of what people preferred?
no, that wasn't. I don't think there would have been anybody who preferred the reproduced. You know, you're sitting in the room with a live musician. If you prefer stereo, you know, it's almost as a psychometric thing. Even if the sound was identical, the fact that in one case you're standing in front of a live human and seeing them interact with their instrument, it makes it, you know, it'd be very, very hard to conduct that research.
You'd have to blindfold the subjects.
Yep.
Yeah, but then you change their reaction.
Of course. It's not, yeah, it's not kosher.
But even then, it is almost never the same. Let's let Ken get on to the end of AR and move into.
Yeah, this was what I labeled phase 1 out of 5. But anyway, let me see if there's anything else. I covered the ADSP, blah, 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 NAD stuff, blah, blah, blah. I moved out to California in the mid 80s, begrudgingly, following a partner who got work here in a difficult field. And after deciding that there was no place I wanted to work out here, I decided to start a company and make loudspeakers. Before that, I had been doing a lot of consulting. I was working with, I worked a lot with Proton, if you remember them, because do people know the story of NAD?
Yeah, somewhat, yeah. It started out with the AR electronics line and.
Yeah, it was New Acoustic Dimension by AR. It was a Marty Borish idea.
Right, Marty.
And Teledyne said, you can't do that. We don't want to be in electronics. The Japanese are about to take that market over. They were right. But Marty Borish did it anyway and got fired. And he took basically the AR staff and who were working on New Acoustic Dimension, who were a lot of ex-Dolby people, long, strange stories. And he started NAD in London, and I went over to work in London with NAD. And then NAD spawned a company called Proton, which was NAD's manufacturer and distributor in the Far East.
Mm-hmm.
So I worked for Proton for a while. I worked on the very first stereo TVs for LG. It was Gold Star at the time because stereo TV was just coming online, and
Lucky Gold Star.
Yeah, everybody was trying to upgrade the sound of their TVs. So I worked in Korea for a while. At NHT, our first model was a little two-way 6, and it was an important product. What I said when I founded NHT was, you know, I know high-end loudspeakers, and I know loudspeakers that sound really good. And yet I come out of mass market. You know, I worked at AR, I helped Boston Acoustics build their first production line. You know, I'd worked with Bose. I came out of a hardcore mid-fi, quality mid-fi world. And I said, you know, there's no reason why you can't apply mid-fi mass market thinking, but have criteria and quality expectations that are really high performance. Why don't we do that? Let's make a speaker for as little money as we can make it, but make it really good. Because, you know, a lot of times what makes a high-end speaker really good is it's not the expensive components. It's that they can't sell a lot. And it's that they take a long time getting it really right. As opposed to some place like AR, that's like, well, we need 7 more models by CES and it's October, you know, and they'll be what they are. So NHT was an attempt to say, let's use mass market thinking. My partner, who I was on the technical side, and my partner, Chris Byrne, was the marketing and sales guy. He ran Pioneer and Akai in the US. And so he came out of mass market, the mass market high volume world. And we really tried to make NHT into what performance can we squeeze into an affordable product. We put the angle in the box, the 23 degrees in the little speaker, since if you have a bookshelf speaker, it's not as easy to tilt it in as it might be with a floor stander. And that really became a hit. Not a huge hit, but it was successful enough for the company to be viable. Our first big hit was something called the Super Zero, which in a way, I kind of think grew out of the AR-1MS, the little mini speaker, which was an attempt to make a 4.5-inch woofer speaker that was really good with no bass. And that did well for us. And then the 3.3. So NHT, you know, had a number of pretty popular products.
Put pictures up.
Hmm?
Put pictures up.
They look like speakers, man.
Question about this mini speaker, 4-inch woofer and no bass. It's a trade-off between how loud it will play and how deep it will go. Because I mean, I've built some bass reflex speakers that go down to 50 hertz. And they're under a cubic foot. They're in my kitchen, but they just don't play loud. But I suppose that doesn't work in the market because people are going to play them loud and blow them out.
You have subwoofers. Subwoofers change everything.
That's right.
I remember encouraging a couple of people. I think Andy Casada was among them. Like, say, look, make a small flat speaker. Don't goose the bass, and design it to work with a subwoofer. And that took a while to catch on, but that eventually worked. And
yep.
All right. So are you seeing my screen now?
Yes.
very small.
Teeny tiny.
I own those speakers that you have right there.
They
on
are
the
powered
screen. I have a pair of those.
Oh, I
I have
remember
a pair
those.
of
Yeah.
those right here.
This was the stereo remote control I mentioned.
Oh, wow.
Mm.
I remember that.
So this
That
was
is a wonderful product, and I have 3 of them, 2 of them in use.
this was a magazine cover for the Magic speaker.
That's great.
And you can see the exposed drivers are the front firing ones, and then you can't see the side firing ones.
Right.
But they'd be where the hand is coming out. Here's this was the first introduction of the Magics. That's Ron Fone, that's Alex DeCoster. Let's see. You wanted NHT ones.
I have Sub-Zeros in the other room if you need somebody to show that off.
So this is a big NHT product. Let me see if I can find the first one.
Yeah, I remember that.
This was the very first NHT product, the Model 1. It's basically like an AR-18 driver complement. And this was the little 4.5-inch version, speaker, subwoofers. This was our first video tower, and I like to take credit for being, if not the very first, one of the first companies to say, you know, video and audio are merging. We need to make speakers that go next to a television. And that's one of the things that really helped NHT be a success, was our getting ahead of the game for home theater. Proton radio, another thing I worked on. So these are, that's the woofer that you have, the 1259. Okay, onward. At a certain point, let me stop sharing. At a certain point, NHT, which is where I lived and breathed, was bought by a company called International Jensen. They had bought AR. And one of the reasons that they bought NHT, I think, was to get the brain trust of NHT to help steer AR. Now, I don't know how much to get into that world, but at International Jensen, I took on a role of managing a number of brands. And oh, thank you for the Super Zero.
They're great. I gave these for the kid who is now the main classical music critic for the Boston Globe. I gave him a pair of these for his bar mitzvah. And I'm sure that helped him, you know, go to fame and fortune, because he heard good music from day one. Are you frozen?
Well, you're going to plug it in and play it over Zoom? No.
Well, that wouldn't be so effective, but it's great to look at. It's the right size. They're really gorgeous, and they have piano black chrome on, you know, frame is really great.
Okay, so let's get to the interesting stuff. After Jensen, I worked on something that was very interesting, although it didn't really get as far as it could have, which was an expert system subwoofer that automatically installed itself in your system. And what was interesting about this is that it was a dipole subwoofer and a monopole subwoofer. It had two separate drivers, and you could change the phase relationship to change the radiation pattern of the subwoofer between omni to cardioid to hypercardioid, to try to deal with, and in real time and on a frequency dependent basis. So you could have your subwoofer be omnidirectional at 20 hertz. You could have it be very directional at 80 hertz.
It could do this on the fly?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
And Ken, what was the thinking of why this would be of interest to change below 100 hertz rad pat?
Because of reverberation time
Okay,
and how much you excite the room, and because of how you made it to an upper speaker. Like, are you mating it to a dipole? Or are you mating it to a monopole? You know, because that's one of the big problems if you have an electrostatic speaker. In fact, you know, there's so many stories I could tell. We wound up working with Quad because they used our subwoofer in demos, because you could make the subwoofer be a monopolar subwoofer at the lowest frequencies and then gradually transform into a dipole, so that when you crossed over to the panel speaker, you didn't get a discontinuity in radiation pattern. Because if you've ever tried to put a subwoofer on a quad, you know that's really a problem, is what happens to your radiation pattern in the crossover region. And
below
so
100 hertz?
Hmm?
Below 100 hertz with an Omni sub is a problem?
Sure,
Yes.
sure. It's very, very hard to get your power response to work out right. And so
It's-
there've been a number of dipole subs, like what the hell is the guy's name?
The gradient.
The gradient sub, right? Salmi and Wexstrom did a sub for the quad, but it worked much better in the crossover region, but it didn't have the deepest bass because it was a dipole sub. And so that's one of the things we did with that subwoofer, was complete control of radiation pattern versus frequency.
What was the name of this product?
Get that back today.
Hmm?
Sounds like a perfect product for today.
Yeah, there's lots of perfect products if you have somebody who has a few $1 million to develop and market them.
What was the name of this product?
Intelligent Audio Systems, IAS. I think it was called the IAS 643, but I'm not sure. Let's see if I have anything on that. I do.
But this never saw the light of day, or it did?
It was at a couple of trade shows, and the company crashed and burned, and the technology was sold by the investors to a large British company you would know the name of, that may or may not have used it in one of their products.
$12,000 as of 2003, written up in Sound and Vision.
Wow.
Sorry, 11,700. DSP boosted sub.
Can you post a link?
Complete with, yes, complete with a photo.
Yeah, this is can you see that?
Yeah.
You scroll, there I am developing it in the middle of the night. Hoping that the 2,000 watt amps didn't short.
Right. Maybe you were taking out the resistors, looks like.
Exactly. This I'll just show you for later reference. This is the second wave of AR that I did after Jensen bought the company.
Like an AR3A.
That's what it was, a redo.
That's Henry and Ed.
Oh, yeah.
We had a cool when AR turned, I guess, 40. I went to the head of the company who owned it and said, you know, we need to throw a big party in Grand Central Station because you know, I don't know about you, but I learned a lot about audio when I was a kid, just going into Grand Central and going into the AR listening room in the downstairs terminal.
I was there. That's the only time I ever actually met Ed. I mean, I had a little communication with him other than that, but that was the only time I ever actually met him. I knew Henry.
So we rented Grand Central, part of Grand Central Station for the evening and threw a big party. And I actually invited both Ed and Henry, and it's the first time they met each other in decades. And so that was fun to reconnect them.
Wow.
That's another, that was taken out of CES of those big subwoofers. They were basically, those are the woofers that went into them. All right.
Ted, have you heard the Apple iPod home pod speakers? That look like they've taken everything into account that you're talking about now and put it into a small product.
Yeah, I mean, I have a strong connection to Apple, but I'm not sure what I'm allowed to talk about.
Oh. So you're friendly with Tom?
Hmm?
Were you friendly with Tom, someone whom we both might know who works there?
Yeah, but I wound up working, haven't gotten there yet and may not. I wound up working for a company in Silicon Valley called Tymphany, and who wound up buying all the Danish audio companies like Peerless and Vifa. And all of a sudden I found myself in the speaker manufacturing business. But we were a major supplier to Apple, and we quoted on several of their designs and developed drivers for them.
Oh, good.
In fact, my office in Silicon Valley was Apple's first office, first out of the garage office they bought. And it was about 3 blocks from the main Apple campus. So yeah, my assistant at Tymphany wound up running all of Apple's international audio sourcing, and you know, there are legacy connections there. I'm not saying I did those products, but there's a connection. There's a path there.
About every 5 or 10 years, I have some kind of conversation with Tom, and I think I think he's totally retired now. But I remember asking him, because at some point where he'd gone on to Apple and I didn't know about it, so I asked him what he was doing there, and he said, "Oh, well, if I tell you, I have to kill both of us." So, I don't understand quite exactly what could be that, secretive about anything they would be doing, but still, apparently they're very paranoid. So
yeah, they're very, all I know is when we used to visit them for sales meetings, you weren't allowed to bring non-Apple products onto the campus. You had to leave
your Android phone at them.
If you had your phone or your laptop. So you'd show up in these complicated meetings and you had to use a pencil and paper because they confiscated your non-Apple laptops and security. It's a weird place.
What does that mean about what their connection with your Apple products? That's a little disturbing.
Yeah, who knows?
Well, Ken, I'd like to know what's your idea of the ideal radiation pattern after all your years in audio? I mean, we all know about the tool.
We were just getting to the fun part of the presentation.
Okay.
We might not have time. But the fun part is when I decided to get into rock and roll and make guitar amplifiers instead of audio. And one of the reasons that I did that is because I decided speakers were at a dead end. This is what I was going to talk about all today, but we got into nostalgia, which is great. But what I really was going to talk about was, are speakers at a dead end? And the answer is, I think they are. I don't think we can get any farther with loudspeakers. until there's a conceptual change. If you think that polishing a dB here or a dB there in a frequency response is going to suddenly make the sound real, you're kidding yourself. It's not like that. We are up against very serious conceptual barriers. When you put a microphone in a room, you are doing lossy data compression, okay? And I think this is really important if you care about music reproduction to really think about this. I don't care whether that microphone is a directional microphone or an omni microphone. I don't care if it's perfect microphone. When you put a microphone into a sound field, you lose information irretrievably. Okay? There are, and I know this is controversial, but there are an infinite number of source microphone configurations that will yield the same electrical signal out of the microphone. Okay? You can always find a place where the frequency response will be the same. You can change distance. It doesn't matter. Once you're working with an electrical signal, which is a one-dimensional signal, you've lost the 3 dimensions of the sound field. It's gone. Loudspeaker designers have to guess. Okay? Don't talk to me about stereo. Stereo has nothing to do with, as it's currently conceptualized, Bloom line stereo is not about recreating sound fields.
Right.
It's about fooling your perceptual system into localizing in certain places, azimuth localization. You will never get that information back. And as a loudspeaker designer, I'm told, here's an electrical signal. That's all you get. You get one electrical signal, a voltage versus time. And you need to build that into a room. Maybe you need to do this 4 times or 12 times with 12 different channels. But the job of every loudspeaker is to take a one-dimensional signal and turn it into a 3-dimensional signal. And you do that by inventing information. You have no knowledge of that information. That knowledge is lost in the recording, and you have to guess. So how do you make the ideal loudspeaker? How do you do that? You don't. You can only make an ideal loudspeaker if you know how the recording was made. End of story. Okay? And I know, listen, it's my world. I know about Floyd's work, and I know about Soren Beck's work, and I know about Earl Geddes' work, and I know about Allison and Berkovitz. And I mean, this is my world. I get that. But all of those people are talking about where in a closed room you find the most pleasant place to sit, and nobody is walking to the other side of the wall of fidelity. I don't know whether that analogy works, but everybody is saying, well, what do people like to hear and what do people want to hear? But all of those preferences are being established based on a reproduction paradigm that is necessarily information deficient. Necessarily. Basically, what they are is, if you say, people ask me, well, what do you think? Is Allison right? Or is Soren Beck right? Or is Floyd Toole right? And my answer is, well, which is right? A Mercator projection or whatever, orthographic projection? these are all maps of the territory. They're not the territory. Okay, they're just maps. They're a data reduction of the real world. And
Ce
so,
n'est pas une pipe, you know, ce n'est pas une pipe, the famous in French in the 20s, a picture of a pipe underneath which it said,
Yeah.
"This is not a pipe."
now I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Well, to create an actual sound field duplicating that in the recording, you would have to have an entire wall of the room, which is a microphone with a
Sure.
bit, pixel density or audio, whatever density sufficient to pick up the highest reproduced frequency.
Of course,
At a data rate of sufficient to do that. And the bandwidth would be enormous. Then you'd have to reproduce it over a speaker that would do
but
the same
again,
thing.
this is an interesting conversation. Obviously, if you wanted to do a perfectly accurate sound field, wave field synthesis, if you're familiar with that field activity, yeah, I mean, you have spatial aliasing just as much as you have frequency aliasing, meaning that if you want to reproduce spatial phenomena of spatial wavelengths that are 1 meter or half a meter, you need 2 microphones every half a meter in order to reproduce that space without aliasing. And I get that. In fact, here's one that I'm not going to defend now, but have you ever noticed that you can always tell when a loudspeaker is playing versus a live source? Not always, but usually.
Absolutely.
Spatial aliasing.
I
One
thought
is creating an aliasing and multiple foldovers of the stereo of the localization field, if you will, and one isn't. But we can get back to that maybe. At any
It
rate,
raises an interesting question regarding what Hankook is doing in Cambridge University on immersive audio.
yeah, believe me, this is very interesting, and there's a lot of people working on this stuff. And obviously the hope is if we get smart about understanding, we'll know what to throw away out of that wall of microphones, right? There has to, but all I'm saying is the way we do stereo now, a loudspeaker designer is at a complete disadvantage, okay? You can't make a better speaker because as soon as the recording type changes, what the ideal speaker is changes. The ideal speaker for reproducing a Jekyll disc recording is not going to be the same as a spaced omni recording. It's just not. And you can fuss all you want in an anechoic chamber, and you can fuss all you want with DSP, making the radiation flat to any spatial or power spectrum degree you want. The fact is, you're guessing. You're making stuff up. And what you're making up is the transformation between a one-dimensional electrical signal and a three-dimensional room. Okay?
Quick
Like I
question,
said,
Ken.
Yep.
May I ask one? Can I take you back to the room where the live sound is playing, being piped to the room with the speakers in it?
Yeah.
Did you think at the time about how to reproduce the pattern of direct and reflected sounds that were going on in the live room with speakers?
We didn't try. We were just demonstrating what it would sound like if you bought these expensive speakers. And so this was really a commercial demo. It wasn't a science experiment. But I agree with you. We would have to do what you're talking about to make it convincing. We just weren't trying to make it convincing.
Okay, and when we were arguing on Facebook about some of this stuff, I think you had written a large entry and various hundreds of people were responding with a lot of comments. did you read a copy of my paper that I wrote in '89?
I've read that back then
Okay,
and since.
all right, thank you.
I think you have a lot of interesting points. But I'm concentrating on the speaker itself rather than the geometry of the playback. And rather than on perceptual issues, just simply, I've got a signal at my terminal. What do I do? What do I do?
So let's go back to say, like, you're at NHT in your design, or AR, wherever you're designing loudspeakers. And so you're trying to design a loudspeaker that, you know, is a reasonably priced thing that you can sell and that people will be happy with. So how do you approach this problem? What do you think when you're doing this?
Well, I think it's something that most loudspeaker designers know about. I think Floyd Toole gave it the name, the cycle of confusion, or something like that.
Yeah.
Where we use recordings to optimize loudspeakers. And the recordings were chosen because they sounded good on the speakers we had optimized. And that really is a serious problem. What you do if you're a commercial loudspeaker maker is you look at the recordings people are saying are good recordings and you make them sound good. That's your job. I mean, I hate to sound like Alex DeCoster about what makes a good speaker.
Oh, I liked Alex a lot. I just thought that was funny. I thought
we shared our AES paper on the magic speaker I did with Alex. But it really is a problem. I mean, that's what I'm saying when Floyd talks about listener preference. I'm saying he's talking about where do you want to sit inside this conceptual room without stepping outside the conceptual room. And I just don't think there's a good answer. And it's why I stopped working on loudspeakers, frankly, because I don't know what to do better. I really don't. I know there's
if I might interrupt for a second, just to put a little different perspective on what you're saying. And I understand exactly what you're saying and not ever being able to get the live sound. But what I used the term earlier today was a reasonable facsimile, because if you can have a certain number of the parameters, obviously not all of the parameters, that
I've been in this business for decades and sold millions of loudspeakers. I get it. Okay, I'm not saying it's hopeless. And I understand that, like what Gary brought up or other forms of wave field, there's a lot of work going on in this field. It's not a dead field. However, it's still a question of what I, as a loudspeaker researcher, as opposed to designer, how do I make the loudspeaker better? Okay, I don't have control over the geometry of recording. If there are, if Dolby comes out with a new standard, or, all of a sudden some, multi-channel new standard UHJ becomes accepted, then I work with that. But as strictly as an engineer designing loudspeakers, I need a figure of merit to work towards. Okay, I'm not controlling how the speakers are being used or how the recordings are being made. What I have control of is, if you give me a voltage, how do I make the air move? That's all I can control. And what I'm saying is, I don't know how to do better I know how to do different. I could build you 10 different loudspeakers that would sound good and sell well. Okay. And I've worked, I've had multiple clients. I've been doing one speaker for NHT while I was doing one for Denon and one for Altec. I get it, and they all have different criteria. But what I'm saying is in terms of what the speaker as a transducer does, the speaker guesses. That's all it can do. The speaker guesses. It makes stuff up.
Well, Mark Davis said that what we hear about a speaker is frequency response and radiation pattern, right? So what if you had a speaker with a variable radiation pattern to fit to the room?
Or
Well,
to
that
fit to
was
the
what I
program.
tried to do with the Magic Speaker. That's exactly what I tried to do.
Yeah, or to fit to the program.
But speakers do more than that wrong.
Yeah, you can't just say that, because even if the speaker has a variable radiation pattern, which the Magic Speaker did, and there's something I should also have mentioned about the Magic Speaker, it had 3 ways of deriving the ambient energy. Okay, what went out the side of the speaker could have been L, it could have been R, it could have been L plus R or L minus R. But that's all you have. Okay, it's one thing to say, let's make a speaker with a variable radiation pattern, but it's still sending the same stuff in all directions because it doesn't have information about what goes in what direction.
So what you're really saying is you need to do a vector analysis at a position of the microphone, a 3-dimensional vector analysis. In other words, sound from all directions with some kind of a multi-pattern pickup that's a point source, and create a loudspeaker to exactly match that microphone pickup pattern.
One microphone.
I'm not saying what you have to do, because the real world is a world of compromise. Okay, audio is any form of reproduction is by definition a loss of information. We're taking this wonderful concert, right, full of sound and excitement, and we're putting it on a little plastic disc or a little memory card or a little file. All that stuff is down to so little information. It's not really fair to loudspeaker designers, damn it. What you have to do, you're saying you have to do, sure. I mean, we can postulate ways to make a perfect reproduction of a sound field. But I can tell you that I've been in, I would say, 3 different lab demos in my life that I couldn't tell from real sound. Okay. And I think I had good ears in my day. And I couldn't tell. One was at both Baranek and Newman, which was a multi-channel encoded sound field synthesis system. One was at AT&T, which was a different form of recording playback in a room. And one was a headphone-based system with tracking, with head movement tracking. And particularly the one at BBN, I couldn't, provided my head was in just the right place. And I mean, within maybe 2 or 3 centimeters, it was real. It was frighteningly real.
That was a huge system, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tom Horrell's system.
Yeah.
And it proved to me that it's possible to make sound realistic without capturing everything. Okay. I think what's missing is between this vast system with 16 or 32 channels and lots of number crunching and a microphone that, has to be brought by forklift into the recording space. Between that and what we have now, how do we, what is the path? How do you embody that in a loudspeaker?
Does multi-channel make it easier?
Sure, multi-channel is incredibly powerful, but it's still from the point of view of a speaker designer who doesn't have control of the way that people make recordings, or even frankly how they set their home stereo up. I still have to have some sort of objective way to know whether my speaker is doing what I set out to have it do. And I just don't know. I don't know what I would do different. Somebody said to me now, hey, Ken, it's your lucky day. Here's $5 million. Go start a new little speaker company and do it right. Really do it right. Well, the first thing I'd say is 5 million ain't enough. But, after they gave me another 5, I literally wouldn't know what to do. And any loudspeaker designer who tells you they do, I think is full of it. Okay. Any loudspeaker designer that says, oh, well, I could use this new tweeter with the hyper neoplastic quasi plasma, whatever, it's shot out to 40 million hertz. And they don't know. People don't know what to do better. Okay, we can already take a speaker and stick a DSP processor on it and make it flat within 1/100th of a dB at your listener's ears, and it still sounds like a damn speaker. Okay.
Are there speakers that you enjoy listening to music on, though? They're not perfect, but
of course, I enjoy listening on my home laptop speakers.
Well, I'm sort of speaking more of, let's say, high-end speakers, since that's what we tend to be interested in.
Oh, yeah, because they work well on the recordings that I happen to have. But when I put a recording on that sounds lousy,
yeah,
it doesn't mean there isn't a different speaker that would have made it sound great.
I think there are some radiation patterns that can give a pretty good simulation.
And I think that's fine, but you have to know.
Yeah.
This is really a phenomenological question. You guys are, you spent the first 30 minutes of this meeting talking about concert halls. That's not buyers out in the real world. Okay, nobody is listening. Nobody knows what it's supposed to do and when it's right. And that includes me as a loudspeaker designer. Okay, you can choose whatever you want for your own speaker and recording, and you could say, well, this does a good job, but how does that help me? They're your recordings according to how you want to hear them. They don't help me design a marketable loudspeaker that's going to give that experience to a lot of people.
Presumably, a lot of recordings these days are designed to sound good on AirPods.
Sure.
Or at least loud.
Yeah.
Ken, if I could interrupt for just a second, because you've been talking 100% about the speaker, and I understand that coming from a speaker designer. But you've got the room, you've got the interaction of the room above the Schroeder frequency, you got the interaction of the room and the speakers below the Schroeder frequency. And if you do a bunch of things right, what you do find is you do find people coming in to listen to a speaker that's been optimized to the room. And what they say is, oh my God, I've never heard this before. Now, it's not maybe exactly the same as a live performance. In some cases, with some of the live performances I've been to, it's actually better than the live performance where they had a terrible setup, which has been ameliorated by a good recording. But
in all due respect,
the people out, go ahead.
In all due respect, you don't spend 4.5 decades paying the rent in the speaker business unless you know how to give people good experiences. I know how to give people good experiences. I know how to sit people down and have them say, holy cow, I've never heard anything this good before.
Doesn't that mean you're a success?
Yeah, that to me sounds like success.
Of course it's success, but it's success that's heuristic.
But there's no such thing as high fidelity because there's no way you can ever reproduce the information that was in the original sound before it became a signal.
That's what he's saying.
Yep.
Yeah, but that's true.
That's not
but
what I'm
people
saying.
haven't heard the original.
That's not what I'm saying. Maybe you can do that. What I'm saying is, as a loudspeaker, you don't know. As a loudspeaker designer, you don't know.
I agree with that.
No.
I agree with that.
What Tom is saying
Doesn't
is
mean
that
it can't happen. Of course it can happen. You know, before every trade show, we would spend weeks sitting in front of the speakers playing music, figuring out exactly what sounded best and where to put things in the room. I mean, come on. You know, we've all been doing this a long time. We know how to make good sound. We know how to make impressive sound. We know how to make stunning sound. That's very different than saying the process of recording and playback is a deterministic one. It is not. It is a series of experiments every time you do it. Every time you set up a stereo, you experiment. You experiment moving it around the room. You experiment with what music sounds best on it, where you're going to put the seats. It's always a matter of using your knowledge as a listener to improve your listening experience. Okay? You don't just go to the store, buy some speakers, set them up, and any disc that you buy that's made by a quality engineer will sound great. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. You can go and buy 20 discs at the record store. I know discs, I'm dating myself. Might as well talk about Victrola. But you know, you can go and buy 20 CDs, and how many of them will sound really good?
all Tom is saying is that
Well,
it's
lots.
not just speakers that you're listening to. The speakers in the room are a system. Which I'm
That's
sure
part of my
everyone would
problem
agree
as a
with.
speaker designer. You've
Yeah.
got the mic, you've got the room, you've got all this, and I don't know how to make a better speaker. I'm just being honest with you.
But I think we're at the end of this topic. Ken, why don't you move on to either rock and roll amps or more NHT work? Anything you want.
Could I ask one question first? This kind of ties into it because I was interested, you know, remember you worked on the ADSP, and back in the day when the ADSP was, people talked about, you know, we'll remove the room, we'll just tear the recording, this, that, and the other, and all that's kind of disappeared over time. I mean, there's still much more sophisticated digital processing now available, but nobody's trying to do that anymore. And I wondered.
Because it's impossible.
Impossible, yes, thank you.
It's mathematically impossible.
But you didn't know, did you know that back when you were working on the ADSP?
We figured it out about halfway through.
Okay.
Just being honest.
Yeah.
Rooms are non-minimum phase systems. You cannot assume the existence of an inverse transform. And
Okay.
when you have singularities in the response, you get energy sinks. You get points in the room where there simply isn't energy transfer between your speaker and that point in space. It doesn't matter how you try to EQ it, it's just not going to work. You're not going to get energy at that point. And what that does is it makes your algorithms fail. And so, you know, this notion of room, first of all, the notion of room correction is silly. Because as Gary mentioned, the speaker in the room are one. And to try to correct the room, you're just making assumptions about the speaker. You know, it's like if everybody went out and bought an AR ADSP or a Snell or a Tact or one of these, you know, room corrections, would everybody's speakers all of a sudden sound the same? You think that? You really think that? No, I don't think that.
No.
What do you mean by a room corrector?
One of these inverse transform, we're gonna look at the impulse response of the room and build an inverse impulse response.
We're going to try to remove the room then?
Yeah, that's was the philosophy.
That was
Mike
the
brought
original
up.
idea way back in the day. That was the idea.
That's what I'm saying you can't do. You can't do
You
it.
don't want to do it.
Well, that too. But even if you wanted to, which we did, at least on paper, it's just, it wasn't a well thought out idea. It's like, well, gee, this is fun, let's do it. But
It would be taking you outside with your speakers and putting a sofa down and listening to speakers anechoically.
and well, it'd be more than that because the speaker itself is inseparable. So it would be making a perfectly generic speaker and putting it outside.
Yeah.
No, you want the room.
Yes.
Well, there is a school of thought, which I encounter occasionally, that says that what you want to do is get rid of the room altogether. What you want to hear is just what was in the recording, and somehow you'll be transported into the original recording venue, and somehow this is all recording, which is
Well,
nonsense.
yeah, I mean,
But
to be fair, what
I
we
do
thought
encounter this from time to time. So
when we were working on
So
this.
that's
at
pretty
AR,
unsophisticated.
That would be a binaural system with
when
loudspeaker
we were working at
binaural.
this at AR, the kind of unwritten philosophy is that you'd have a, you know, like the 16-channel reverberator. You'd have something that removed the room, and then you'd have an artificial
right
room that you superimposed. You know, to whatever degree of accuracy you chose to. And that was the holy grail. Remove the listener's room and let them, I mean, I think, who was it that came out with it? It wasn't Yamaha. I think it was one of the Harman companies, Lexicon, maybe,
Lexicon, yeah.
that came out with the, we can build you any room processor that crashed and burned in a year.
Well, the philosophy has changed. You remember Studio 8H, where Toscanini did his radio broadcasts. It was a dead studio. And my sense of it was that the philosophy, if you can call it, behind that was that people's rooms at home would furnish the sense of the room. But also at that time, you were dealing with a. Go ahead, David. You
No,
said
sorry.
something. I didn't hear what you said because you talked over.
No,
me.
carry on.
Well, also you were dealing with lower signal to noise ratio and on the audio recordings on disc at the time, a lot of background noise, or hiss. So
Yeah, I think there's a lot to recommend that approach. You know, I think that there's a different conversation about live music you know, in classic, quote unquote, acoustic music or classical music, just isn't that big a commercial force anymore. And so the incentives are not as great as they used to be to do these kinds of experiments. But when I was working with Denon, when they were a client of mine, they were doing a lot of anechoic recording. They built a, I don't know if you ever heard it. I don't think they marketed it here, but it was quite popular in Japan. They did a whole orchestra completely anechoically.
I have a couple of those CDs.
Hmm?
I have a couple of those CDs. Yeah.
Yeah, they're real interesting, but they're tough to listen to.
Yes.
You don't want that.
Yeah. Well, you could want it if you had the right post-processing, ostensibly. But, you know, that's a pretty far bridge.
Well, Room is a pretty nice post processor some of the time.
So I think the problem with the home listening room is something that I discovered back in phase 1 of my life. And that is the mean free path isn't long enough to provide correct reverberation. It's that simple. You know, your reflections reach you within the fusion time and they muck up the imaging. They just, and the tonality. You know, if you have a 2 millisecond bounce off the floor that's co-linear with your first arrival at your ears, that's going to sound way, way different than the pure sound. And it's not going to sound like reverberation. It's going to sound like coloration.
It strikes me that doing all this focus on the loudspeaker from a manufacturing standpoint is understandable, but it's really the system, including the room, that you want to optimize.
Well, now you're getting to what I've been trying to say from the beginning. As a loudspeaker designer, I can't work alone anymore. Loudspeakers are good enough now. So if you tell me I want a speaker that's flat from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz within 1 dB, I can do that. May cost you, but I can do that. Okay, whatever you tell me you want, I can do. You know what I'm saying.
I'm just saying that it's the directional impulse response of the room that.
Exactly right.
And
so
that's
as a
going to take.
loudspeaker designer, I need the cooperation of the room and the recording to know how to improve the product. Otherwise,
One of the recent articles I did in Audio Express was about the room. And I started off by saying the 800-pound gorilla in the room in high-end audio is the room. And
well, there's a lot of 800-pound gorillas, you know, that we don't like to talk about. But anyway, I came to this point where I don't know what else to do with loudspeakers. It's that simple. Between driver technology and DSP, if you tell me a response you want, I'll give it to you.
Okay, so what's next?
So I gave up. I said, you know, I think I'm going to do something else for a while. I love music, and I saw an opportunity to go in a different direction, and I made a little guitar amp with a lot of unique technology in it. And the philosophy was, you know, I've spent decades of my life trying to make little boxes sound like concert halls. Okay. I've spent my whole life trying to make something that's, you know, 7 inches high and 4 inches wide, make a listener think they're listening to, you know, Metallica or the Tymphany at 110 dB. And so why is it that that philosophy couldn't be applied to making musical instrument amplifiers? Why do they have to be so damn big? We're all getting old, okay? Nobody
you play
wants
guitar,
to,
right? You play guitar.
Yeah, I make a hell of a lot of money being told to stop. You know, so paid to stop. Yeah, I mean, the idea that some of the philosophy about frequency response and frankly about distortion could be put into making guitar amplifiers. We have we made a little one called the Lunchbox that's used a 6.5-inch speaker that's routinely put up against 12-inch guitar amplifiers, 12-inch speaker guitar amplifiers, and it became a big hit. Out of nowhere, you know. Can I link to a live web page? Anyway, I was going to show you some of the people who use the ZT amplifier now, but it just, you know, everybody just fell in love with that. And we have a lot of very big acts using it, and that was the last thing I did in audio, was make guitar amplifiers based on DSP and based on perceptual modeling of the sound to make the amp sound bigger than it is.
And do you have the ability to use a lot of plugins? Because I know a lot of the people that I know that are into creating music, not recreating it, want to make their guitar amps sound like so many different guitar amps of the past. And nowadays, a lot of them are doing it with electronic plugins.
Yeah, so no, we took the opposite. We said we want to make something unique. We're not into modeling. We thought a lot about that, or just decided, you know, our business model was not to do modeling. And in fact, I've been contacted by more than one other company who say they want to use our sound in their models. In other words, they want to put the ZT sound as in their modeling profiles because it was a unique sound. You know, I'm not, that's a whole other field. I'm very well aware of the field of modeling microphones and amplifiers. And I think there's some, just like the idea of, can you correct a room? Can you make a room disappear? There's a lot of people forget about some of the first principle issues about why you can't make a room disappear. And people forget about some of the first principle issues about why you can't model a guitar amp. It doesn't work. Okay. It works to a first degree. It works from a point of view of a tonality. Okay. I can buy a modeling, what they call a modeling guitar amp, and I can push a button on it that says Fender, and it'll sound kind of like a Fender. And then I can push Marshall, and it'll sound kind of like a Marshall, blah, 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 blah. But it doesn't really play like those amplifiers because it can't model the three-dimensional sound. Very simple example. If I play an open back guitar amp, it's like a panel speaker. Okay, I've got an anti-phase rear wave coming off the back of my guitar amp. And a lot of people really like that sound. It gives the amp a sense of blossoming forth, and it gives a very reverberant sound. And there are guitar amps that people really demand be open back, but it takes away some of the low frequencies, and it changes the character of the sound. It makes it more, you know, directional on axis and things like that. How do you model the difference between an open back and a closed back cabinet? You can't do it. You can't do it. You can make the tonality about the same, but you can't make the way they excite the room the same. It won't work.
Not without opening the back.
Right. It's the same way as people say, well, I'm going to model I can make my SM57 sound like U87. No, you're not. No, you're not. Maybe for a closed mic subject where all you're getting is one specific simple frequency response. But the behavior of the two systems is so different that they just don't feel the same, which is why you don't get a lot of professionals using modeling amps. Maybe, if they're playing a cafe gig, sure. But they only tend to capture the first approximation of what they're modeling.
How do you get a small amp to sound like a big amp? That was obviously part of your thing. It's like you make something that was small, easy for people to carry, but still sounded big. How does that work?
Not sure what
I
I
think
want to talk about.
I think
One thing is where the sound goes, how you're controlling the directivity. And the other is the use of distortion. I know that sounds weird, but one of the cues that we unconsciously associate with SPL is distortion. And the ZT amplifiers have processing in there that creates distortion that is not level dependent in a traditional way. Let's just put it that way.
Didn't Tom?
So there's distortion in the lower levels that there would be normally.
Yeah, and at different frequencies.
Okay.
Didn't Tom Holman have to address that issue when he initially designed the amplifier that went into the, what was it, the KLH-21 radio, as I recall, because he had to take basically a small, like 2-watt amplifier, drive a 4-inch loudspeaker and make it sound good. And it wound up being a trick in terms of distortion levels and other things. But you'd have to touch base with Tom to find out exactly how it was done.
Well, I could talk a little about that later, but the other thing is a flatter frequency response than traditional guitar amplifiers, a smoother frequency response. Boy, this is a tough one to explain, and I'm not sure how interested people would be. We hear pitch to less accuracy than we hear. Yeah, this isn't working. Let me try again. Let's say I'm a guitar player and I bend a note on my string, okay? So that note, let's say it starts at 440 and it sweeps up to 480 and then back down again as I'm playing. If I model a guitar amp with a 3rd octave frequency response, what I'm missing is all the countless tiny peaks and dips that happen in a mechanical system that you don't see in an average frequency response, right? If I were to do an extremely high resolution measurement of a loudspeaker, it looks pretty messy, okay? Now, I know what you're thinking. We don't hear those things. Our ear averages them, critical bands, blah, 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 3rd octave. Yes, that's true. We don't hear those things as frequency response anomalies. But what if I'm a guitar player and I'm bending a string, and as I'm bending it, it's going from a -20 to a +20 spot in the spectrum. That's huge, okay? That's something that you get in a real acoustical amp. You get all these tiny effects that are extremely hard to measure, but really affect how the playability of the amp. If I model an amp, then all I'm doing is sticking a microphone in front of it and I'm measuring it probably, 24th octave maybe, if I'm, doing it in some detail, and I'm losing all these micro resonances and little peaks and dips and all these cancellations and microphonic coupling that average out in the frequency response, but are very much a part of the playability of the amp. Okay, when an experienced player plays it, they're either, when they bend a note, they're either hearing it warble or they're not. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
What I missed that. So one of the things we did with ZT was make the response smooth, but also make it very jagged in very tight ways that are very hard to do with traditional IIR or FIR filters. Does that make sense?
It sounds to me like you're basically talking about resolution. Is that the correct thing I'm hearing? It sounds to me like you're talking basically about resolution.
Yes.
Okay, that's all it boils down to.
So you have this kind of dual purpose where you're trying to build a very smooth frequency response, but one that has a lot of micro structure to it.
It's smooth if you smooth it, is what you're saying. It's like if you took the response, and smoothed it, it would look smooth. But if you took it at an extremely high resolution, it would look more jagged.
Exactly.
Well, I'm thinking of the difference between the response of a violin or any stringed instrument, for example, which is very peaky,
sure.
and what we think of as ideal for a loudspeaker, which is smooth. Also, having listened to recordings of piano music and acoustic recordings, that Victrola acoustic recordings of pianos always sound watery because the frequency response is so peaky and uneven. Edison recordings sound really smooth because he had apparently discovered damping. And this was in the acoustic era, recording into a horn. With a guitar amp, you have these little perturbations, but you also have the room. And I would think the room or the open back into the room also have a lot more to do with frequency irregularity in a guitar amp.
You also have a very different situation in a guitar amp between what the player is perceiving and what the audience is perceiving. And that's always an interesting question of how you just design an amp. Because if you're, and also how you're using it. If you're recording in a studio and you're listening to your amp over the monitors, it's a very different playing experience than if you're sitting on top of the amp with your guitar. The other thing that I found, and this is just a total aside that I think you guys might find interesting, is when people were playing electric guitar with our amp, we couldn't pin down, there was tremendous disagreement about the very high frequency response of the amp. And it turns out that a lot of people were hearing, even though they thought they weren't hearing their electric guitar with the amp playing, they actually were hearing the attack on the strings acoustically. even though the amp was much louder than their solid body electric guitar, the impact of the pick on the strings was still giving these little high frequency clicks that had the effect, number one, of making them perceive reduced latency when they were playing, which is an issue with guitar amps, and two, changed their perception of the response, which I thought was interesting. So you have that, can people hear can they hear the instrument as well as the amplification or not?
Well, I was, at the first time I saw this, I asked, this doesn't look right. Someone was recording or I think amplifying an acoustic guitar with the microphone pointed diagonally at the fretboard from the headstock end. And oh, why is that? That's because these little clicks from fretting the instrument are part of the sound. And you don't get them if you put the microphone right in front of the body of the guitar.
Sure, that's definitely true. So, I don't know. Then I wound up at this place called Tymphany. And our big deal was making new driver technologies. And this is the last thing that I was going to cover, so we're pretty well done. Let's see if this works. It's so weird because I have to shut the screen down in order to share it, but it still knows it's open.
Somebody asked a question about there was going to be a series of LAT drivers from Tymphany.
Yeah, I was going to show some pictures of that.
Okay.
There never will be. Or I don't think Tymphany's in that game right now. There we go. This was the very first ZT amplifier. Are you seeing this?
Small.
Yep, small. There
Okay.
you go.
Anybody know who that is?
It's Vilcher.
Nope, that's common confusion.
Cool. Vilcher's twin.
That's Neville Teal.
Oh.
These were Tymphany drivers. These were big lats. Basically what they are two opposing motors with a number of diaphragms coupled to them. And Tymphany did a lot of these kinds of interesting driver. This was a little tiny magnetically suspended transducer that I was working on. They used ferrofluid as a drive. This is a big, tall lat, this is Danish. A lot of, this was an array of ferrofluid powered drivers. They used ferrofluid as the diaphragm so that there didn't need to be a suspension. That's a really big LAT. It just didn't. Oh, sorry. That's the back of the lunchbox amplifier. The LAT just, it's a great idea, but it's expensive for what you get.
What is an LAT, please?
It's that driver that I just showed you. It's called a linear, LAT stands for linear array transducer. And it's a lot of diaphragms driven by only two opposing motors. And the advantage of it, besides a huge volume displacement, is that it doesn't vibrate. We demonstrated this one at a show, and you could easily put out 100+ dB bass frequencies, and we had a quarter or a nickel or something balanced on the top, and it wouldn't fall over just because of the mechanical balance of the system. So LAT stands for linear array transducer, and there are several, these are all versions of it, but I just don't think it was commercially viable, frankly.
It was cheaper to just put a big driver in a box than to do that.
The LATs are complex.
I think manufacturing was the hard part. I think in order to get the price down, we needed to be able to volume manufacture them. And holding the tolerances, what you have is you have a bunch of diaphragms, and then you have rods going through those diaphragms. And if the rods are too close to the edges of the diaphragm, they rub. And, or, too close to the edges of the holes in the diaphragm. And if you make the holes bigger so that they don't rub and you can actually assemble them, then you get air leakage and chuffing. And so it's just, it's one of these things that you can make it work by throwing fixes at it. And by the time you're done, it's just not viable. It's not viable to manufacture, and that drives the cost up. And so it's not viable to sell. And, for these things to work, so many little parts all have to fall into place. You can't just say, oh, it does this well. It has to be manufacturable. It has to be tolerant, fault tolerant to quality control issues with your raw materials. There's so many different problems that a new design brings up that it just, the teething period, it never got through that. Never got to the point where they were just coming off a production line as a mass production product.
Looks a lot like when ESS tried to make a so-called Heil woofer.
Oh yeah,
original Heil, which they never really produced.
Yeah, we had to deal with the patent for that, so I'm very familiar with it. And I knew him a little bit just from local audio activities. But yeah, he had a similar idea. It's one thing about audio you figure out. It's like, no matter what you think of, somebody's thought of it somewhere. But a new
Bell
idea.
Labs in the 20s and 30s.
Yeah, exactly. Or Herman von Helmholtz with his seashells, I think that's one thing I learned very soon into this business. I was a hobbyist who loved to build my own speakers, and inventing stuff is easy. Once you know what you're talking about, inventing stuff is easy. Actually building it, marketing it, manufacturing it, explaining it to the public, that's the hard part. Because I've formed a couple of successful companies, I'm mentoring 2 startups right now, both of them overseas, one in Europe and one in the Middle East. I do a lot of that. That's kind of what I do in retirement, is mentor people who have ideas, who are trying to build companies around them. But I think, one of the things you learn early on is that Ideas are cheap. You know, the hard part is execution. The hard part is all the little, you know, getting through all the little details of making stuff and selling it. And it's one of the things I love about this business. It's one of the reasons I didn't stay in a lab, because I like that. I like that side of the business. I like getting out and telling the stories and listening to the feedback and getting my rear end kicked in, and, you know, really bringing stuff out. And to me, that's the cool part.
To a degree, I think that's why we're in the hobby.
No doubt.
We have to learn to accept the compromises.
Now, that's something I didn't expect to hear on this call.
Unfortunately, engineering is compromising. You can't do it perfectly, so you have to compromise.
Well, that gets back to what I was saying. How do you compromise if you don't understand the raw material you're given? You know, what compromises do I make as a loudspeaker designer?
It seems we've reached a quality plateau of speaker design and production. That's, you know, like you said, there's a barrier we can't get beyond. We can't reach perfection.
We're at it.
Which is better our designs.
If you were to take any speaker on the market today and compare it to the best speakers from 1965, the differences would be very small. Conceptually. I mean, it could handle more power, the bass would be a little cleaner, the tweeter would have a little better dispersion, blah, 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 blah. But the experience of sitting down in front of a 1965 speaker and a 2000, whatever the hell year it is, speaker, we haven't made any conceptual breakthroughs.
The averages come up though a lot.
Yes.
I mean, I do not hear nearly as many flat out bad speakers as I used to hear when I first got involved in audio. I mean, there used to be a lot of really, really bad speakers.
Sure, but that's the average coming up.
Right,
That's
exactly.
not the top going up.
Yeah.
And we do know a little bit more about designing the kinds of speakers we do design. And there's computers out there to help us. So people aren't throwing quite as many darts at the wall.
Now, of course, speaker design has come a long way in a lot of areas, but the paradigm has.
We're in the area of diminishing returns. We're in the area of diminishing returns now.
Exactly.
So
unless there's a major breakthrough in the total redesign or reconceptualization of how you generate and move air.
Well, I don't think it's that. I think it's a reconceptualization of how you want the air to move. I think we're pretty good at moving air now.
Sounds to me at this point, it's up to marketing. That's the most important part of the speakers and what you're saying.
Always was.
Yeah, well.
This meeting is going on 3 hours and I have calls from my family to rejoin them. I'm wondering, I mean, I've been taking notes here, but my ability to continue to do that is highly restricted. So how long is this going on?
I think we're winding up.
Yeah, I think it would be good to wind up. I've been on all day waiting for this, and I'm ready to do what remains of Sunday. Take out the garbage, basically. Feed the
More of
cat.
it remains for you in California.
Yeah, but I know. It's great.
So we should say thank you very much. It was great fun.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah.
Anytime. I feel like I feel like I covered about 1/10 of what I planned on, but had 10 times as much fun doing it. So it works out.
Nice to see you, Ken. Nice to see all the people I haven't seen in a while, and thanks.
Yeah, it's great. It was nice to see you show up here.
Well, you all come back, you hear?
I thoroughly enjoyed this. I hope that you can come back and continue with some of the stories and some of your information.
Yeah.
I found this very, very enjoyable. And
Another
Yeah, it
3-hour
would be fun
session.
to, it would be fun to pick one topic and go do a deep dive rather than here's everything I've ever done in my life.
Zoom meetings have, I think, given us something that we've never had before. I know I'm from the New Jersey club. We've had 5 or 6 international meetings that we never could have had before.
Yeah.
Technology is
And,
wonderful.
And you know,
Loudspeaker radiation
everybody have my email address and we can chat on Facebook or by email. I love talking about audio, so don't be shy.
I
If
just
they're
looked for it again
followers.
and I can't find it, Ken. Can you
Okay.
put it on the
Alright.
chat, maybe?
Yeah, I'll just tell you, I'm KKANTOR, K Cantor, my name at Gmail.
Thank you.
Couldn't be easier.
Well, thanks for the invitation. It was nice to see folks and I look forward to doing it again.
Yeah,
thanks
thank
for
you.
being here.
Thank you.
Okay,
Very
thank
Have
much.
a good evening.
You too. Thanks
Bye.
again. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Have a good evening
Bye,
Good night.
everybody.
and a good week.